We're going to move on to the next item, item D2 and D2A. So Land Development Code, rewrite, and the updates from the working groups. I have a few folks signed up to speak on this item. Before we do that, does staff want to give us an update? No pressure.
Brent Lloyd, certainly available to answer any questions you have. I think in general, October, I think as we've said before, is a very busy month. Lots of meetings, lots of outreach and events. And additionally, we will be providing at the end of this week a supplemental staff report that will recommend several changes to the text as well as the map for consideration by the commission and by council ahead of the commission's public hearing on Saturday. And those changes will include everything from fairly granular technical errors that staff has identified based on its own review, as well as a number of changes that are responsive to comments and feedback from the community. So look for that hopefully on Thursday, definitely this week.
Thank you, Brent. Okay, I've got four speakers signed up to speak. Shani Clemens. Is Shani Clemens here? And then followed by Lauren Stanley, if you'll be ready to speak at the other podium.
Hi.
Hi, you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm Shani Clemens. I'm a landscape architect and owner of Shademaker Studio here in town. Tonight, I wanted to hone in on impervious cover, the section of impervious cover as it relates to single-family housing and lots which do not require storm quality measures. I haven't had a ton of time to dive in to understand all of the new zoning titles. So I'll just say small lots. I want to hone in on this section of the code as it is applied to the real world setting. Because as a landscape architect, I see how impervious cover is practiced daily. So if you want to look at the slides in front of you, this is what I see on a daily basis, where compliant impervious cover is installed all over our city in every single neighborhood. I want to question the proposed impervious cover allowances as how it will be applied in the field. The term soil compaction is only found once in the draft LDC under definition for critical root zones. The proposed LDC needs to protect our soils, our unprotected trees, as well as our heritage trees. It needs to give us guidance on how to address construction compaction and how porous surfaces can truly remain porous. I don't think that critical root zones can carry the burden of all of our porous areas. So I wanted to show you this slide because this is kind of the development that's happening in all of the neighborhoods, but particularly on the east side, where construction critical root zones are protected, but the rest of the site is 100% impacted from construction. So trees are one thing, but we're looking at sites and contractors are parking their vehicles, compacting the existing surfaces that are supposed to be landscape areas that take on that stormwater and recharge the system. And instead, it's blanketed with sod that will die in 5 minutes in the summers here. So this is an issue that I felt is missing in your current draft, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Lauren Stanley, then Afi Schwartz, if you'll be ready to speak at the next podium. Ms. Stanley, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Lauren Stanley. I'm an architect, practicing architect. Have something I'd just like to read out. So in considering the land development code, there's this overall vision, which is about bigger ideas. We all want a resilient future for Austin. Many times people speak of resilience and climate response in terms of energy, emissions, decarbonization, and carbon offsets. But we need to be talking about resilience and climate response equally in terms of supporting nature in the city, of urban ecology and ecosystem services, and of equal access to green for all residents. The idea of green connectivity is a very important one in the cities of the future all over the world. Green corridors connecting green nodes of all kinds should be just as much a focus as transit corridors in cities. Strengthening the urban creek system, creating green transects from exurban to the center of town are examples of these larger ideas. What about the idea of creating areas of density in outlying areas of the city? Where do the folks go who are displaced if we are to avoid sprawl? Do we need to build to absorb all growth in the center city, especially if we haven't worked out mobility yet? These issues underpin the consideration of the new LDC. Structural aspects of the code. How specifically is the new code dialing down to realizing what the larger plans call for, plans like Imagine Austin and the 2023 Strategic Direction Plan? We need to regard compact and connected and green and sustainability not as a zero-sum game, but as mutually supporting through creative reuse and design. How is the code giving breathing room for a more nuanced regard for the communities that live here now? How does it support a more organic, heterogeneous densification, the kind we see in older cities around the country and the world, where small shops and services are intermixed with dense residential structures and pocket parks? Multifamily structures are often quite homogeneous. There was a recent presentation by Mike Powell in Imagine Austin speaker series about the significance and very real function of older, smaller buildings and the health, vibrancy, and vitality of a city. Older building stock is ironically quite flexible if reused, and they say the greenest building is the one that already exists. Construction waste and building material use is a giant contributor to carbon production and a warming planet. We need to keep that in mind, especially in my profession. We can keep in mind that the lower density represented by single family also allows distributed green and older trees. Maybe we could consider a tighter McMansion ordinance to encourage smaller houses and established green. We just heard that Atlas 14 will not address localized flooding. I think we need to go further, not just to match current impervious cover levels, but to do better, especially in a changing climate with increasingly major weather events. Building heavily on transit corridors seems like exactly the kind of thing.
Final thoughts.
Did you realize
Jen?
I was talking that long?
Mhm.
I just had a final note about placemaking and how important that is, and that we need time to explore how this code can adapt to the nuances of the communities in the green that we need to have in our city to make it resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stanley. Afi Schwartz, you'll have 3 minutes. Then Christopher Page, if you'll be ready at the other podium.
Hi, sorry about the confusion earlier. I'm a resident of District 10, and as a resident, taxpayer, and neighbor directly affected by the proposed land development code that the City Council's direction provided to the city manager regarding LDC significantly deviates from previously accepted, widely adopted, and publicly approved plans for city growth, specifically Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan, which requires specific mention here due to the LDC's draft deviation for priority programs that are included in Imagine Austin. Priority number 1 being compact and connected communities, and priority number 6, affordability. Priority number 1 states implementing the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, Bicycle Master Plan, and Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization's 23 Regional Transportation Plan in support of the Growth Concept Map. This is a quote directly from Imagine Austin. In most regards, the LDC adheres to the nature and the spirit of growth within our city, but in many significant ways deviates from both the Capital Metro 2035 Regional Transportation Plan and the Growth Concept Map as a whole. Specifically, for example, the Growth Concept Map restricts public transportation to high-use streets and corridors typically designated at level 3 and above. However, the LDC uses, in several examples, low-density residential streets, typically level 2, under the name of transition zones due to them being adjacent to corridors. Primarily, this is driven by the need to achieve inflated housing capacity goals. Additionally, the LDC draft justifies the implementation of transition zones and upzoning uniformly across all neighborhoods and property types in an effort to address priority number 6, affordability. But in actuality, affordability requires rebalancing and recalibrating to maximize affordable housing in areas where housing is in fact going to be affordable for low-income families. The current method of uniformly applying transition zone policy risks displacing existing residents while not contributing to the city's overall goal of more affordable housing. We ask that the Planning Commission make the following recommendation to City Council members and the Mayor. Reevaluate the stated goal of allowing for housing capacity equivalent to, and I'm quoting, at least 3 times the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint. We hold the belief that such an aggressive goal is the root cause of many of the underlying objections by residents to the current LDC draft. We also believe that there's sufficient data which supports that such high housing capacity goals are not required for the City of Austin to reach affordable housing in a manageable way. If housing affordability is to be the primary policy driver for code, then City Council should advise the City Manager to restrict the granting of entitlements. Oh, geez.
Final thoughts,
I'll
sir.
finish up. In areas where the yield in long-term affordable housing will be low and the risk of displacement of existing residents high. Just 2 more. Re-examine the policy of designating level 2 streets as transition zone corridors for upzoning simply due to their proximity to adjacent corridors. And also re-examine the policy of designated level 2 streets as transition zone corridors where such criteria as streets currently utilized as local metro bus routes where ridership is deemed very low, or future bus routes are going to be removed from the plan entirely.
Thank you, sir. Christopher Page. Sir, you're going to only have 1 minute. You're going to have to talk really fast.
Okay. Is this on? Yep. Okay. Feel free to ask questions too. So I'm here to talk about a problem that I don't think is currently accounted for in the proposed LDC. I live in East Austin on an extremely steep alluvial bank that's only held together by the vegetation. To my immediate south, there are no higher than 2-story buildings. It's zoned for commercial service mixed use, but it was always limited by residential compatibility standards and height. Now that it's zoned to MU5A and it's kind of arbitrarily deemed a transit corridor, there is no longer any residential compatibility, and they can erect 90-foot buildings directly behind my property, which will ultimately impact the stability of that slope. I know with Shoal Creek, that was a very expensive solution for the city. I'd like to see something in the LDC that preempts those kinds of situations. I think a residential compatibility standard in uniquely sensitive environments like my own would actually preempt that problem and save the city a lot of problem, as well as prevent displacement from the 15 affordably rented families that currently exist both in the CSMU area and on my SF3 street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Commissioners, those are all the speakers. We can move on to the working group presentations. Is there a particular group that's anxious to go first?
Process should go last.
Process should go last.
Go to the other 2.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Kenny.
Do residential first?
Residential first. Okay, so you'll have 10 minutes for residential between you and whoever else wants to join in the presentation.
Right, and I will invite my other commissioners to jump in if I got some of this wrong, but it should pretty much be our notes. It's coming? Do I need to do something to make it come?
No.
No?
Just wait.
So just to set the scene, we, at least thus far, have not looked at the map at all. We really just looked at the text. I know some members of the group are interested in the way In particular, the R2B was mapped in some areas, and some of the incongruity that might be created by having part of a street or one side of the street mapped R2B with its smaller setbacks rather than R2A. But this feedback really just looks at the text. I would say that by and large we were fairly happy with the text, and that our amendments were fairly minor. There's a lot of just little stuff in here, so I'm just going to go through them. This will be posted. We have like 15 individual little items. So this is accessory apartments, internal ADUs. This is currently in the code. It's what I use to build an apartment for my in-laws. Essentially, this is a way to get DSD to allow you to put a second kitchen in your house. We are looking at, this is an internal apartment or accessory apartment and internal ADU. It doesn't count as an additional unit, so it doesn't count against your unit count. It must have a door internal to the rest of the house, but you don't get an FAR bump. We are looking at maybe doing a size limit on it, and there's a limit of one per lot, and we are also looking at maybe having an exterior door. This is today's accessory apartment, except it doesn't have the requirement that somebody back there be related to you or over the age of 65 or disabled. So this is separate from and should not be confused with the external ADUs that can be attached or detached. So the idea here is that this doesn't need to have a separate HVAC, doesn't need to have a firewall. It's really just allowing you to get a permit to put in like a second laundry room or a second kitchen without DSD's telling you that you're building a second unit, and that's not legal. So we think this is probably the best way to get quick, unsubsidized, affordable housing, aging in place. It's something that's in current code, and we want to see it restored. Garages and parking, and just as a reminder, this is just for R zones, not RM zones. Current code has a exemption for your FAR of 200 if it's behind you or attached, or 450 if it's attached. Our read of the draft code is that it does not have a limit on the FAR that you're exempted for doing a garage. We thought that could result in very large structures, some of which are maybe converted from garages to living units. So we wanted to put back in a cap on the FAR exemption that you would get from your garage. But something to make a little bit more loose than the current code, an engaged front porch is essentially if you have an L house, and the porch is there in the crook of that L. And we said that we think that the current proposal has the garage has to be behind the main line, front line of your house. And we said, well, if it's forming the part of, if you have the porch kind of attaching it, the garage can form that part of the L. So it's a way that the garage could be brought forward, but it cannot exceed the front lot line. And I think it'd be most productive if you guys want to jump in whenever I'm on the slide. Okay. Feel free, go ahead. And then I believe the current draft, the impervious cover limit is at 45%. Based on some modeling from some architects and builders, they asked for 50, particularly for the more narrow lots. That seemed like a pretty small ask, so we said, if that's what you really want, that seems like something that could be accommodated. Did you guys want to add anything about garages and parking?
Well, let's see. IC on the last one still stays at 45%, so bumping to 50 doesn't mean we're increasing IC. The whole front, private front frontage, front porch, I mean, it's already a typology that's in there. It's just, and if you look in the text, there's a diagram of it, and it's just that the garage piece is now the one that's forward forming the engaged porch. So it kind of is already covered in there. We're just kind of tweaking a couple little things on it.
Yeah, so clarify, not an increase in overall impervious cover. Current code allows 100% impervious cover. Draft code brings it down to 45, and we are not necessarily emphatically saying that. We said staff maybe look at going up to 50. ADUs, some adjustments to encourage them. We think that there's maybe some direction that council could adopt that when processes and fee schedules and whatnot are being assessed, that departments should be directed to reduce the cost of building ADUs through fee waivers, calculations, shorter approval times, and other means. And I want to call everyone's attention to the mayor's comment at, I think it was last work session, in which he suggested that at first reading there could be there are two buckets basically, technical fixes and then another bucket that is basically May 2nd style direction. The council could ask staff to go and draft some of the red line language. This would be maybe part of that May 2nd style language that could be done. And I would encourage us all to maybe think along those lines. It could help our stuff make it smoother through to council. And then we thought that since duplexes are 2 units and get 0.6 FAR, that it made sense that if your ADU just happened to be 10 feet away from your main house, that you should get the same encouragement to add a second unit that duplexes do by bumping that FAR for your ADU.
When we were discussing both ADUs and duplexes, I think there was some concern that we want to try to incentivize owner-occupied as well.
Also, I am looking into perhaps creative ways of helping homeowners finance these ADUs because they can get very expensive, especially with some of the utility regulations in effect today. So I will be adding that as soon as I have a complete proposal.
Manufactured homes. The current zone that is in the draft is very large. It's like 90,000 square feet and has a minimum of 20 trailers on it. Great, that's fine. We don't have any changes to that, but we think that that might either create or not give an opportunity for a lot of the existing mobile home parks to be compliant with code. So we suggested that while that is the park, that maybe there be kind of a flexible mobile home lot designation that would enable the smaller lots that have mobile homes on them now to continue to be or to become compliant with code. And then we suggested that there might be another variant of mobile home park to accommodate tiny homes, and that might be similar, but just with maybe a unit size cap per unit. And that similarly, it might be useful to think in terms of a larger lot, and then or a larger park, and then a lot, so that if someone wanted to rezone the current, say, R2 SF3 lot and got it approved by Planning Commission and Council, they could turn it into a tiny home park. We thought that should be an opportunity that exists in the text. We weren't suggesting mapping it. R4 has some issues, we think. Just to review, the base is 4 units. It has 50% impervious cover. I'm calling it the tiered cake or the McMansion tent, whatever it is. It's 25 feet high for the first 10 feet at the rear and sides, and then it goes up to 35 in the middle, and then it's got a bonus that gives you 8 units, same 50% impervious cover, and your tent or cake goes up 10 feet. The initial feedback that we had gotten from some folks in the architecture and building community is that 50% is just not feasible for 8 units, and that's partly because they are continuing to supply parking for that for the foreseeable future, and then for maybe a while for some of the areas that are mapped R4, depending on kind of how transit improvements go in. And if those lots get rebuilt with lower entitlements, we've just lost that opportunity for housing for generations. So. We also didn't like the idea of giving that impervious cover for, say, 2 units, a duplex use, or just right out the gate by right. So what we were pretty solid on was that if you're only doing 1 to 2 units, i.e. if you're keeping your existing use or making a duplex, you keep that 45% impervious cover that you have today. That if you're taking the full bonus at least, or any part of the bonus to get up to above 4 units, that we bump that up to 60% is more feasible to build on. And one of the things that we wanted to put up for discussion, and maybe we can have this in the round robin comments later, is we wanted some feedback on what do we do in the middle? Is there a 50 or 55% bump up that you get to for just doing 3 or 4 units? That would encourage 3 or 4 units. But if we, I'm really running out of time. Can I get my time donated maybe? And then I'll run a lot quicker. Okay. So what should we do at the middle?
So who's donating time?
Can I get
Okay.
3 minutes?
Does that mean I cannot speak?
No, I'll continue to let you to jump in.
Okay.
You can jump in. You just won't have your special 3 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
This is a new missing middle zone. I'm calling it the Goldilocks zone. And just to kind of run through this really quickly, it's essentially an R2A base, but gets you up to 4 units, but you stay inside that same tiered cake. So essentially, it's house scale, the same size and height as an R2 that would be next to you, but you would get to fit 2 more units in there if one of them is an affordable ADU. And we want to kind of kick this to NHCD to model a little bit, but one of the things that's just been discussed with some stakeholders is that a ratio of 3 new market rates square feet for every square foot of affordable ADU that you built might work economically. For a total FAR of no more than 1, and that flexibility will allow it to maybe work on smaller lots and not just large lots.
And I want to comment that this is similar to the SF5. If you remember, it's like units per lot, but we are using this tool to actually get affordable units on it, which is key. And it is residential house scale. The whole idea of it, it wants to fit in the R2 areas, nicely. That's the intent of it.
Right.
And we're still working out some of the details, and we have not gone through NHCD on
Right,
this.
but that's the intent is to.
And we
The
heard
intent.
transitions and affordability kind of asking for something like this, and so we wanted to give you all another tool that you might avail yourselves of. But we are, I think, at least at this point, not looking at mapping it ourselves. Right. Fixes to cottage court. This is from me. We didn't get a chance to fully vet this, and I just wanted to put this up here partially for staff. I've gotten feedback that on 6,000 square foot lots, anything less than like 9,000, that cottage courts just really don't work because of the required size and configuration of the courtyard. And so this is an alternative proposal that would give some flexibility there and maybe not have it so much as a courtyard, but just more flexible, kind of spaced, smaller units, maybe put a size cap on the number of units. Fences and private frontages. We didn't want opaque 6-foot fences at the lot line. But since we're allowing pools, we wanted to say, okay, let's have something there. So we came up with 4 feet. Maybe a portion of that could be opaque, maybe a portion of it not. We weren't quite sure. And then for private frontage, that's porches basically, that we make sure that if there's a safety rail on that porch because it's above grade, that be allowed under your height limits for your front fences. FAR, we want to put some limits on potential workarounds on FAR, especially considering the bump in FAR that we might be getting for duplexes and ADUs. Rather than having attic exemptions, or there have been some fanciful renderings with like curved roofs and saying like that doesn't fit under FAR, we just thought let's sync it with the residential code and set if the ceiling is 6'8" or higher, that area counts against your FAR. That's part of a floor. And then if you have a 15-foot floor, that counts twice. We know there's a lot of retrofits to add in a floor there, as well as it being horribly energy inefficient. So let's just minimize the shenanigans and help push people towards those duplexes and ADUs. Double lot development. We have this for cottage courts. We wanted to add this for the other zones to essentially say if you have a lot that is twice as wide and twice as big, you can essentially do twice the homes, and you don't have to go through a subdivision process because that's super expensive and time consuming. And if we just allow it in the entitlements, then people will condoize it, but it'll knock, I don't know, what, $10,000, $20,000 off the cost of
For subdivision, probably 30,000. And the other thing is they were going to condoize it anyway,
Yep.
so they're just going to condoize with more units. Same thing.
So no more density. It's not more density. It's just allowing double lots. Unified development.
And real quick, if somebody wants to go 3 lots, that's when we said you should just go subdivide. That was
Right.
the whole point of double versus triple.
Yeah.
Okay,
Unified development. This is something that we wanted to ask staff about because we've gotten some questions about this. That unified development agreements are really cumbersome right now. Is the feedback that I've gotten. Is there a way that we can make that lighter weight, especially for your missing middle kind of characterization or size zone there? F-25 sunset, we'd like to ask staff or maybe ask council to maybe set some goals or having staff propose some goals for sunsetting or F-25 and incorporating everything into the code. Could be flexible. We could push through the deadline. Don't know, but we'd like to get there.
I'd like to comment there, and I staff, I'm sorry, the comments from council were to leave the NCCDs and the other development agreements alone. I support that, but it will take time to go through all the F-25 to see why did they get this designation and work through and try to bring them into code, but not NCCDs at this time.
Okay. And then just running really quickly in my remaining 1 minute, 10 seconds. Last year we passed some direction on TDMs for parking reductions. Staff took the council direction on up to a quarter mile and did some stuff for a quarter mile to a half mile. And we were suggesting that maybe one way to look at the qualifications to do that be in the direction that we passed last year and looking at individual sites. Commissioner Shea might have some more stuff on that. Yep. Shade trees for transition zones. This interacts with process. We want to apply the front yard tree planting standards to all residential zones that are used in transition zones. We want shade for people walking on sidewalks to transit, but we also want to check those requirements to make sure that they're really pushing those trees towards the front while allowing enough flexibility to deal with utilities and things like that. So we'll have. Well,
and just point out that side note. So we are considering this recommendation instead of requiring the required front frontages on R2s, like R2Bs. You have to build a private frontage, and we feel that potentially trees are a lot more important than those.
R1 versus R2C, we're not super clear on why those can't be merged. We should talk more about that, and that's the end.
All right, good timing. Okay, so other commissioners that still have time left. Who else is on the?
Shea and Seeger.
Well, Seeger gave up her time. So
I
Shea,
gave up mine.
did you have anything to add or?
So what was the thing that I had to add was, as far as for the parking, I know Connor was telling me that, okay, so we had passed something to consider some different things for before you give a full reduction. Currently in the code, it says if you're quarter mile, then you get 100% reduction, half mile, then it's like 50% reduction. And I guess there was modifiers as far as just the presence of a sidewalk, as we've seen already, even with one of our community members that showed and modeled to us that there's more to it than just that. You got to look at the width of the streets, the intensity along it. There's so many different things that need to be considered before you just give a blanket reduction. So all we're saying is there's TDM, traffic demand management. What we could do is also put like parking reduction management, something that you have to qualify if you could be providing bike racks, anything like that. We already have that in code for commercial type stuff, but to say blanketly reduction, I don't know. We should make them do a couple things to be provided so that that process has gone through to see how much they can actually reduce it. As far as for UDA, I would love staff to talk about the UDAs of the cumbersome of it, to talk about the cost of it. MH zone stuff. The idea was not, it wasn't just to create the zone. It was that we have MH properties that are SF's current R zone sizes. We have like 10,000 square foot MH zones, and we have no category for that. And what do we do with that? And to be able to allow those to exist and be in compliancy, it also allows more affordability, because now somebody can actually put a manufactured home on an MH zone property. They can even condoize it. If we still stick with the 4,900 square foot per unit, then they can put two. They can condoize it, and now someone can own their own house, their own lot, a lot less expensive than a site-built house. And we want to be able to capture that with the existing MH. I'm trying to think what other pieces. I think that's.
I think you can ask commissioners in his time. Is that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
But I think
somebody ask Commissioner Seeger about ADUs when they get the chance.
Okay. So that's my comments that I can think of right now, just to kind of finish up Connor's presentation.
Okay. Thank you. All right, commissioners, we've got up to 8 commissioners, 5 minutes each. Use your time wisely. You can encourage staff or whoever's answering a question to get to the point or move on to another question. Okay? Commissioner Thompson.
Hey, Commissioner Seeger, what about ADUs?
I have not given the final proposal to the group. However, I'm thinking about looking at scaling the ADU size to the lot size, starting at 850 square feet and going up to 1,100 square feet. Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
I guess I just have one question. It's not, does it have to be about R? For Mr. Lloyd, can ask a question to you about just about some of the things that the commenters had said earlier on.
Sure.
And this is just, we've heard it several times tonight about the comprehensive plan. And I just want to make sure that I understand what the comprehensive plan is. It's not, Imagine Austin isn't the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is Imagine Austin and the strategic mobility plan and the strategic blueprint and all of those plans that are passed as adding on to the comprehensive plan, and it's all of those. And it's not that one is the master or takes precedence over those. And can you sort of explain that?
I think that's correct. I think that I've also heard it described that the other documents that you mentioned are elements of Imagine Austin and incorporated into it. But fundamentally, yes, the book that bears the title Imagine Austin is not on any greater footing than the other elements of it. They all have to work together in harmony.
And if we were to take that into consideration, then we might think when reviewing the LDC and the code that things that were passed more recently might be more up to date as opposed to parts that were passed 20 years ago.
I hear your comment.
Thank you. Okay. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Shaw?
So I'm going to try to, I think Matt Holland's coming back. Does anybody know? Okay. So a question for staff on the use. Well, let me just start with the working group. So did you guys look at the single family attached? I think you're allowed, it's 2,500 square foot lot. Any comments on the actual need for attachment there, or? I mean, I'm not sure why it needs to be attached.
We have a bit of a difference of opinion.
So is it, you're talking about the R1?
No.
No, the single family attached on the 2,500 square foot lot.
R2, I think,
Right.
allows it.
So that's essentially somebody who, for whatever reason, really wants to subdivide that duplex lot, right? What's incongruous to me is that single-family detached only gets 0.4, but duplex gets 0.6. I would like to see it bumped to 0.6, just because I think the standard should be, let's encourage 2 units on our standard size lots. And if we're allowing a half lot essentially there, it should reflect that. But we did not have agreement on that.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to do with the fee simple ownership.
The ownership.
So if it's a duplex, it is not a fee simple ownership, and so it's the 0.6. And if you get, if you do single family attach and subdivide, it's fee simple both sides, and so it's left pretty much as single family.
Okay. I'm running, burning my hours here, my time. Let's see. So for the, I have a question for staff on this R4. I guess I didn't realize you could build a duplex then and still get the on an R4 get the bump in impervious cover. You don't have to build 4 units. So for the recommendation of the working group, that's true, right? Duplex, you can, okay. So.
And remember, we did ask the commission for their feedback on where that bump happens.
Okay, all right. And then I'm going to, can I, just because I don't think Watershed's here. Is anybody from Watershed?
Just, I can pause your time until we get.
I'll do that.
Okay, 2 and 45. Okay. That's pretty good. Commissioner Anderson?
Just real quick, so maybe I'm reading this wrong, but can our duplexes now be 40 feet tall? Did y'all take care of that?
Duplexes are the same as all the R zones, which has an overall height limit of 35.
What about an RM1?
That's 40.
Sorry, can they be 40 feet? A duplex can be 40 feet?
Well, I don't know. I'm saying RM1 is 40 feet.
I mean, I guess I'm excited for things that help with additional density. I don't know if any of our goals is to try and have big individual units. So that may inadvertently do that. So I wonder if there's a way where
so
we
you're
can,
correct. RM1 duplex.
Yeah.
If you have RM1, you have a duplex. According to this, the overall height max is 40 feet.
I wonder if there's a way we need to look into that. To maybe allow that bonus for 3 or greater, that height for 3 or greater, but if it's a duplex, maybe.
Take it back to 35, but let them go to 40 if they get turn it into a
3 or more.
3 or more. I like that. Okay.
You're talking about RM1 or R1?
RM1.
So we'll talk about RM1 in the next presentation.
Okay. Awesome.
And that issue in specific.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, and Ms. Seeger, did you have any more questions about anything?
Oh, well, thank you so much, but no, thank you.
I did want to mention that a similar issue, the R2D that we're proposing. I worked with some architects and code consultants on that, and they all really want 60, but all of our designs came in at like 55, so I think we could get away with doing 55 maybe. So it would be a bump, but I think we would be proposing something along the lines of similar to the other ones that unless you're taking that bonus, you're still only getting the 45.
Commissioner Anderson, anything else? All right. Matt Holland's back. Commissioner Shaw?
So this may be covered somewhat in process too, but since you guys brought it up, the 60% impervious cover allowed for an R4 that you discussed?
RM1, R4 is 50.
But are you guys proposing going up to 60 with R4?
Yes.
Okay. So this is kind of wrapped in the transition areas and where we would use the R4 and where we have increases in impervious cover for RM1 and R4. Do you see any concerns with not having, okay, so anything with 60% or more you might require on-site controls, or above 50% right now, is that going to require detention on site?
So we weren't proposing, so is the question, what's the difference between R4 and RM1 in terms of drainage?
Yes, where's the break for on-site controls?
So the key difference is R4 is a lower key in terms of imperviousness category. It just goes up to 50. We're offering the streamlined process, so it really follows more like an individual building permit, residential building permit type process, so it won't get a full-blown site plan and full-blown a drainage review by a professional engineer. It'll be more like its next door neighbor or the single family home. RM1, it goes up to 60. That will require a site, well, looking over at Donna, you usually don't just say this, but basically it has to do with, it's going to need a full drainage certification with, drainage plan. It's small, those are almost all going to be small enough that they will receive, they'll be able to do something off-site, like upgrade a nearby drainage system or pay into our regional stormwater management fund, but it'll get the greater attention of a professional engineer during the review.
So are there any concerns if, from your side, if we increase all the R4s that are in these transition areas to 60%, is that going to pose any, localized flooding issues in your opinion, or is it 10% and not really a concern?
It depends on what the proposal is, I suppose, but I mean, if it's just, do we upzone them all to RM1s so that there is no R4 and there's just everything's treated as RM1 and they would all get the full drainage plan? It also would increase impervious cover in these areas. We've tried to sort of delicately balance the impervious cover per council direction along with trying to get all the housing. So that would actually ripple through and would increase the impervious cover.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Commissioner Yanis Pulido.
Thank you. I wanted to save you the walk back and forth. Okay. Can you help me understand why, what is the evidence that you all are using that impervious cover is contributing to erosion but not flooding?
So actually, I kind of had a bit of a revelation on this recently. I think when most residents are thinking about local flooding, we staff are thinking about lot-to-lot flooding, and nobody really cares whether they get flooded by lot-to-lot versus local flooding. They're getting flooded, and that's a problem. But the floods happen when, in our view, I mean, in our definition, floods are happening at these much larger, more significant rainfall events. So you're getting 4, 5, 6, 8 inches of rain, and so at a certain point, the pervious cover on the site gets overwhelmed, and pretty much all the water is coming off any surface, impervious or otherwise. So in a larger flood, which is driving these local flooding problems, it really takes a pretty big rainfall event in the impervious cover. Not that it's always a factor, but it's just kind of fades into the distance in relation to things like where's the water going, where is there enough room for the water to move through, between properties and through a drainage way. Lot-to-lot flooding is a major concern of ours, and we are, as Austin builds out and infills, we think that's a big deal, and that is something we have talked about as we have a new solution in our plumbing code, which directly relates to lot-to-lot flooding, where the city would help folks, unlike kind of up till recently, folks really had to rely on the legal, court system to address lot-to-lot flooding.
And I have another question. So a concern was brought up just a minute ago by a citizen in East Austin, and he only had 1 minute to talk to us, so I got a little bit more detail from him, because right now he's on this extremely steep alluvial bank. You heard all of that?
Yes.
So in addition to that, there are critical environmental features. There are 3 identified springs and a seep in that area. And so it is extremely prone to erosion. It's arguably just a very environmentally sensitive area that right now, this might be an error in our current code, but to have MU directly behind these single-family and affordable rentals, it looks like it sets up a really dangerous possibility of development that this area can't handle without critical review. How are you all looking at critical environmental features in these transition zone areas?
Okay, so that's a really interesting case study. We have had the opportunity to talk with the gentleman at some length at a couple previous occasions, and it is a key one to look at. We look at critical environmental features when a lot of different factors arise. So our code calls out what, in circumstances when we start looking for seeps and springs and wetlands and karst features and so forth and rimrock. So this is just kind of a really tough spot that this person is in, because he has all the steep slopes on his side of the land. Then there's a property line, and then there's some kind of flatter properties down below him that were in the past 10 years or so upzoned to CS. So council said, don't down zone anybody. So we basically used an equivalent zoning and put in this mixed use zone. If somebody did want to build those, that would trigger a review for the springs. And actually we did put in some new protections in this proposal that protect steep slopes. Unfortunately in this case, the steep slopes are all on the single family side on the back, not not down below. I'm trying to go as fast as I can.
I know. I appreciate that. How do we fix that? I'm afraid that this is not going to be an isolated case. And I'm talking to a lot of folks in other parts of Austin that are on slopes, and in the topography it's not a flat plain. So how are we mitigating? I'm happy to hear that would trigger a review for the spring. But if we're removing compatibility standards in some of these areas, is there a risk there?
I'm not sure the interaction of the compatibility standard. What's going into play here is the spring's getting triggered, but the steep slope is not getting, and we were proud of the fact that we're putting in steep slopes as a newly protected thing, recognizing that even though they're not widely distributed, there are some cases it would need protection. So if this had steep slopes on it, that mixed use project would have had to really abide by that. So it's really hard to have the code even to get specific enough to nail every one of these cases, and I think this is just an example of where we're going to get some good protection out of it, but it's not going to necessarily pick up everything that we're hoping for. So I'm not sure the answer to your how do we get to that next step, but that's a great question.
Commissioner Hempel, and then Shay.
I think this is a question for staff. It's about one of the zoning categories in residential. It's about RR. And I see on the map it's kind of scattered all throughout Austin, and it seems like a down zoning. And I'm just curious what the thought was there, and if that's still really a need in Austin as we're growing throughout the next 20 years or whenever the code gets updated again.
I can speak to the mapping of the RR, and if we want to get into the specifics of the zone, I will call to Greg Dutton to come up and help me. But RR has, for the most part, been mapped in 3 different instances where the zoning exists today. It's number 1. Number 2, where the interim RR designation exists today, part of our previous process, and moving forward in this process, we have looked to map interim zoning designations to a proposed zoning designation to reduce the amount of interim that's on the map. So there was a lot of interim rural residential on the map, or is currently, that we have applied just rural residential to in the proposed map. The third is on properties that are zoned for development reserve, or DR, that tend to be undeveloped or developed as a more rural residential type property. So those are the 3 instances that we should be seeing those zoning designations.
Thank you. I think for the working group, did it come up at all, if any discussion on RR as a category?
The RRs that I know of are on the western side of 360 and out towards that way. They are large lots because they do not have, they're typically limited purpose or ETJ, and they do not have city sewer services, water and wastewater. So they have to be on septic. That's why the 1 acre minimum on RR.
We did talk about allowing manufactured home as a use on those. And I know that, yeah, personally, I don't know. Are ADUs allowed on RR? They are, okay. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I think the concern from me comes just from looking at my district and knowing that the mapping where I live is already a lot more dense than what's shown in RR, that I just want to make sure that we're not down zoning any areas that are already zoned for something more dense.
Commissioner Shea?
So I would say in any of the design that we approach a site right now, one of the biggest things is trees. We talked about heritage trees, and we've talked about protected trees at 18 inches up to the 24. Something that's new in the code is the keystone tree, and I wanted staff to kind of tell us more about that, because that's something else that we're going to have to consider design around, and also the costs associated with that. Can any staff member kind of walk us through the whole keystone trees regulation? Anybody here? I know, Matt, you talked a little bit about last night, but you were like, I don't know if I'm the right person, but maybe.
Exactly. So I'm going to speak very generally to these. I don't think you have to protect a keystone tree per se. It's something that the new code is going to give an opportunity where in the unlikely and unfortunate event that you have to take out another protected tree, you can use the keystone trees to kind of make up for that gap. And that the keystone, and the idea would be these keystone trees are valuable, we want them to be preserved, and this would actually give them some, identify them and give them some value. But I don't think you have to actually literally save that. So I'm going to go and check the code while I go away, and you get your time back.
All right. And so it sounds like it's something that's actually going to be more helpful, because currently when a site is looked at, a lot of times people, it's like anything less than X caliber, somebody says anything less than 7 inches, 8 inches, or even 4 inches, gets completely taken out. And without even considering, it might even be a nice cluster that could have been great for the development. But if we don't get any credit for it, no developers are going to keep it, and they're going to potentially take out your protected trees, and they'll plant something else when this is something that's been native and it's been there. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's great, and I think that's what I'd like to know a little bit more about, and maybe Matt's going to run through that. But
sorry, I was reading keystone tree regulations.
So it's a direct. Is it a direct caliper? Let's say if I took out an 18-inch pecan, and then what do I get to? And if I kept, let's say, this little cluster of a bunch of 2 inchers.
I don't think they're 2 inches. I think it's 8 inches up.
Oh, 8 inch. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a larger tree, but I'm not sure the mathematical. Is it 9 plus 9 equals 18? Or sorry, I'm nervous because you're time limit, and I don't want to blow
okay.
through it.
I can pause this time
Yeah,
if you
and
want.
we can also consult with the city arborist and make sure that we get, look back at the tape here, make sure your questions get answered, and then get back with the chair.
That's fine. You guys can get back with us. I mean,
Okay.
I'd appreciate
That's probably
it's
way
a
more
good
efficient
tool.
than me
The main thing is
stumbling.
a good tool. Is what I wanted to make sure it was.
Anything else, Commissioner Shea? I'll jump in here for a couple of questions. So working group, you guys said you haven't looked at the mapping as closely or not at all?
Well, as I thought I established earlier tonight, the only way that so SF 1, 2, and 3 was consolidated as R2A, and R2B was applied where there are existing and currently non-compliant short frontages. There's a lot of neighbors in town that have that 15-foot frontage. And then staff also appeared to map some R2B as like a kind of transition, especially I think near some of the red line stops on the west side and some areas around there. But other than that, there was no real mapping per se of our zones other than the transition zone. So I think we partly were kind of deferring to transition for that.
Okay.
But because some of the R2Bs were mapped in the middle areas. I
mentioned that, yeah.
Okay.
And that we might be.
So let me direct this to staff then.
Okay.
So for R2Bs, we heard a couple of concerns about the color being the same, not easy to identify. If one of y'all could address whether we could get a slightly different color on it, just so the community can see how they're mapped. And two, if staff could comment on affordability unlocked being applicable to SF2 and 3 today and not to R2 in the code rewrite. Or am I getting that wrong? So 2 questions about the colors and second one about affordability unlocked.
Sure. So to talk about the colors on the proposed map, I want us to take a step back at the current zoning map and how we have even less of a color spectrum than we have in the proposed. So the single family is yellow, no matter if it's 1, 2, or 3, it's all the same yellow. If it's multifamily, despite what level of multifamily, it's all the same orange. Whereas in the new proposed map, we do have a bit more, they're similar, right? But in the residential house scale zones, it's a zones, excuse me. There's a spectrum of yellow as opposed to just a singular yellow for each zone. So we try to have a more gradual spectrum of color to help differentiate, maybe not as well as some people would like, but to differentiate between the levels within that spectrum of zoning category, as opposed to today where it is just one single color within that category.
Thank you. And I don't think we're suggesting for the long term that we have, a long list of colors or color palette, but maybe right now, while we're trying to understand what's happening and where things are being mapped, if there is an opportunity to show that differently.
Okay, yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. All right, affordability unlocked.
So in the draft code, the affordability unlocked provision related to the development bonuses is in the very back of the zoning code. And it's applicable, it gives a list of all the zoning categories where it applies, and it includes residential house scale zones.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so it doesn't show up on the zone page itself, but it shows up in the back.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
And then about, I think someone from staff mentioned R4 going through, I think it was Matt, R4 going through residential building review. Is that the case today? Or is it after this code passes? So yeah.
So our understanding, these are new missing middle categories. Is that correct? And so they don't. There is no current code equivalent that I'm aware of. The R4 again would be something that more closely resembles the way a single-family residential project is processed, versus an RM1 would be more similar to the way a current site plan project, like a duplex, a threeplex or a fourplex.
So I'm running out of time here, so let me get one more question in here. Today, affordably unlocked, council had asked for a modified site plan process or maybe directly residential review. Is that similar to what Matt discussed earlier?
Donna Galati, Development Services Department. That was part of Affordability Unlocked in the resolution, and it was not part of the ordinance that went with Affordability Unlocked. The proposed code in general provisions does require that staff scale submittal requirements to match applicable regulations. And so that sort of opens up the ability for staff to streamline and match submittal requirements to varying regulations, so that when Matt is talking about these places where regulations differ based on factors, we can take that into account and subsequently scale the requirements.
Okay. Thank you. I'm out of time, so. Okay, anybody else?
Here we go again.
Last one.
Can we ask again?
Okay, you'll have a whole other opportunity after non-residential, so sneak it in there. Okay, should we go over non-residential? Let's do it.
All right, can we get that pulled up? So non-residential, similarly, I would say that we
Chair
were...
Commission Liaison Andrew, before we start, is there a donation of time?
If I need it, can I get it from...
Okay, so you have 13 minutes. Yeah. Are we good? Okay.
Okay, so does my time start before my thing goes up? I think generally, we were pleased with the. There you are, Commissioner Flores. Generally, we were fairly pleased with the text. Again, we didn't look at the map because we thought that the council's direction of equivalency plus transition zones, kind of left that largely transitions. So these are all text amendments. Compatibility, and I'm going to go fast through this, but generally the council's direction on May 2nd was less compatibility in draft 3. Draft 3 compatibility out to 150 feet, I believe. That was off memory. The current draft eliminates compatibility down to 50 feet, and it's got these step-down heights. However, the current draft still uses adjacency as criteria, and we thought that started to get a little silly when you were talking about just 50 feet, because pretty much everything that you're going to hit is going to be within that 50 feet. So in order to not have any shenanigans about flag lots or anything like that, we thought if it's just 50 feet, maybe we get rid of adjacency and it's just distance from the triggering property. I don't think people really, well, I'll remove my. And then, there's still a no-build, the same no-build setbacks exist in the current draft as the previous draft. In the previous draft, we passed a recommendation because it pretty much kills any, like in this case, MU1 that happens to get rezoned in the future adjacent to SF, 30 feet rear, no setback, 15 feet side, no setback. That kills small lots. So I think we should maybe look at that. Heights and FAR. AIA is still completing their testing. We'll know more on Friday. So we wanted to compare, we haven't really looked at the heights and FARs. We wanted to compare it to our study as well as AIA's testing, and we think we might have some recommendations there to recalibrate things a bit. We did want to note that FAR is eliminated in the MS zones and the bonuses, but it's still used in MU and RM. Prior staff testimony has been that the FAR is supposed to match up with height, so it's not really supposed to be a limiter. So we wanted to have a discussion, maybe not right now, with staff about, like, is FAR really still necessary? And one of the implications here is that parking continuing to not count against your FAR means that we're continuing to subsidize parking outside of downtown. So if we got rid of that and just relied on heights, it's something that we could do. But we also discussed introducing an UNO-style step back for buildings over 65 feet to give some more air and light to the streetscapes. It seems to work well for UNO. Nobody complains about it. So that might be a way to get around the problems really associated with getting rid of FAR. And then finally, principally UC, but we want to review the other zones to make sure that all of the increases in heights are really coming through the bonus and not the base. UC in particular, all those zones they're going to get mapped from things that are currently 60 feet, but the base in UC goes up to like 120. So we're losing that value in affordable housing. So we want to make sure to recalibrate that to capture all that value. And just as a reminder, this is the study that we did, and we think it's helpful. This was a kind of a draft of a recommendation of a height scheme that we came up with. RM1, a lot of the same stuff that we talked about with residential and R4, except we don't understand why it's 40 feet with no bonus. How many stories is a zone trying to be? If it's trying to be 4, then everybody that we've talked to says that 40 feet doesn't work, and that 45 is like barely achievable, and that 48 is maybe the right number if you're trying to make it a 4-story bonus. So we wanted to clarify what's that about. Same gradient for impervious cover. If you're only doing a duplex, which you can legally do here, you should only have the 45% that you get now. You shouldn't get the bump up to full 60. We think the bonus should be the full 60, and we're still thinking about and would like input on, like, well, is there a point where it jumps up to 50, or does it stay 45 unless you get the bonus? We're interested in feedback there. We wanted to follow the lead of the residential work group on changes to the cottage court form, which is allowed in some of these RM zones. And then we also wanted to make sure that through, if it's an exception or whatever, that if there are current homeowners there with an existing single-family use, that they should be allowed to build an ADU as a compliant use, even though they're in this transition zone, so that we can have aging in place and not screw with those people too much. Uses. Childcare is permitted by size. We weren't sure that the size categories made a lot of sense. 25 is still like a really small daycare and requires a CUP in RM zones. Maybe that number should be substantially higher. My kids go to a 70-kid childcare, and it's fine. I live next door to one like that, and it's no problem at all. And that relates to some questions that I'd like to hear either here or later about CUP. We've heard testimony that requiring a full CUP, you have somebody who wants to turn an office into a daycare, and all of a sudden they have to have all the parking that's required and the landscaping and get a full drainage review. And if you're just kind of changing that use, we need to be, I think we could appreciate some more information about what's involved in an MUP, what's involved in a CUP, and make sure that we're not really disincentivizing the things that require the CUP or the MUP. Schools are permitted by type instead of by size, and we thought secondary or public primary and secondary are permitted in all these zones. All the other ones are CUP. Does it make sense to change that to maybe a size designation, since that's really kind of what the impact is? So we wanted to raise that issue. Food trucks are not allowed currently in any RM zone, and no MU 1 or 2. That is something, my personal note there is a taco truck on every corner. And then one of the things that, we don't want to mess with bars, maybe partially because of just the rhetoric associated with putting bars in neighborhoods, but restaurants that don't serve alcohol, at least in terms of the preferences of some of us up here, the restaurants that do serve alcohol and are maybe open late are the kind of restaurants that you want in your neighborhood, less than maybe the fast food place. So we weren't really sure why we needed to have a higher threshold of permitted use for a bar for a restaurant that still has to have most of its receipts from food, serve beer or wine. And then and the discrepancy there and the hours. And then I think that is it for uses. That was it. That was fast. All right, so in the remaining time, could we get a little information on MUPs and CUPs? And
I think we did want to talk about parking.
And skip that entirely?
Well, we talked. I mean, you said something in here about it, about parking, for FAR, and whether it should count against FAR or not. And I actually have something else in the process part where I'm talking about parking in a little bit. But we just talked about, could parking be required to be standalone? And if it wasn't standalone, so with the idea that if especially on corridors, if we're parking, if we think that we need parking today, but we may not need parking in 10 years, if you have podium parking, it's going to be very hard to do anything else with that parking in 10 years, where if you have standalone parking, that you could demolish it in 10 years and build something else. And so maybe it'd be some sort of trade-off of standalone parking doesn't count against FAR, but podium parking does, something like that. Just some thoughts.
And we also considered and rejected the idea that that parking maximums along corridors should be eliminated.
Well, that was in the other group. We do that.
Well, I thought we did in this one. All my meetings are fading together.
So did you want staff to comment, or did you want other working group members to?
Well, we have some more time left. Do you want to, since I took your time, do you want to chime in with anything else? Okay. And then the other thing, I guess I think I addressed it in one zone here is, you know, my understanding is that a lot of the reason why we have a lot of MU5 on the map is that we have these current zones that are the only ones that allow like bars or restaurants that serve alcohol, and they're all these 60 feet zones that used to get hit by compatibility. And so that's why we have a lot of the MU5 on the map. And while I understand not putting them into some of the lower MU zones so that there's not fears about bars being put in every neighborhood, the one thing that occurred to me is that while I also understand that MS1 was taken out because maybe MU1 should serve that purpose now, maybe there's an opportunity for putting MS1 back in as kind of like a low-rise, 40-foot, you know, something like that, something that allows those kind of bar or whatever uses, so that in the future when we do rezoning cases, if I want to allow a cocktail lounge in my neighborhood, I don't have to agree to a 90-foot height limit. So that was the last thing that I had in the report, but we did want to ask staff, and I think we can use some of our remaining time to ask for reactions to this, and then also ask about CUP, MUP. 2 minutes and 40 seconds remaining. And then just to tell all the other commissioners, most of the stuff that is the stuff that people think about with these big zones is really a process working group question. So that's why we didn't address it here.
So I'll just very briefly address the distinction between MUPs and CUPs, and I think we have Greg or Lacey can maybe address some of the other zone questions. But the idea behind an MUP, and it was really suggested by one of our prior consultants, and it draws upon ideas in other states where there are things called administrative conditional use permits. And the idea is that if council wants there to be some context-sensitive development review, some option for imposing conditions on a project that are not just application of regulations, that there's a process set up for that that doesn't have to be part of the underlying zoning case, and it doesn't have to go to council. So the essence of an MUP is that staff would, through the site plan review process, impose reasonable conditions. There would be notice provided to other landowners and at utility account addresses in the area, and there would be an appeal option to the commission, but it would not go to council.
Okay.
And the range of conditions that are available for an NUP are more narrow than for a CUP.
Great. And can I ask you, would it be consistent with your vision if Planning Commission suggested some guidance language maybe that talked about how MUPs are for things that are inherent to the use or to the change of use, and that we specifically don't want that to be a process where someone has to bring their entire site up to code? Because I think that's a big concern for reuse and redevelopment. Sure,
That's certainly within Planning Commission's purview to make those kinds of recommendations. Yes.
But is that what you were kind of envisioning?
I wasn't sure you guys would have any interest in MUPs. I mean, that's certainly a reasonable, I think, line of inquiry on your part, and we'll certainly respond to any ideas or suggestions you have. As I understand it, you're suggesting sort of further narrowing the universe of conditions that would be considered for an MUP?
And thus the cost. Because we've heard from people who I think specifically wanted to do a child care, and we had a case before us where it was just a CUP, and they were having to do these massive changes to their site, even though they weren't actually building any new square footage. Thank you.
Any other working group members?
Did you want me to get staff? Anything else you wanted on that?
Yeah, if they wanted to speak to the childcare use is something that we raised.
So the question on the number of students in the childcare.
Sure. So that, can you go back to the slide with the child care numbers on it? So we did get direction from council about making childcare more accessible and easier to do. Currently, the numbers are they're narrower and the numbers are smaller than you've got up on the screen. So we did try to widen the allowances in that regard, and in that way, it's allowing some of the what would be CUPs today, those larger or middle-sized daycares or childcare services to be permitted. So we did expand the numbers. We tried to change the small size to 12 to match what the state allows you to do with I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically like a home care license. And then it's also the small size is allowed as an accessory use to an R zone, basically, so that you don't have to get a change of use permit.
We've also gotten some feedback about the commercial size, the over 25, that the CUP would be more palatable, I think, if it was over 30.
Something like that.
Or, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be something that we'll look at as well. The number of floors on RM1, do we have that on a slide? Yeah, how many stories?
Yeah.
Is this supposed to be? Okay. Do y'all have any response to
Well,
that?
so I totally hear what you're saying. When council told us to keep entitlements flat, don't increase, we took that pretty literally, and all the zones in the current code, they kind of go 40, 60, and so that's why you see a lot of that in the draft code. It's just kind of mimicking that, but totally understand your point that 5 feet can make a big difference.
The FARs in the base, are they necessary? Are we getting a bonus out of the FAR in the base? I'm sorry, are we getting value out of the FAR?
Chair, Commission Liaison Andrew Rivera, I believe it is has the floor.
Mr. Good, you'll have a turn to ask questions. Are there any other working group members? So Thompson, Kenny, Flores, yeah. Anybody else? Okay, let's start with the round robin. Commissioners, you'll have 5 minutes. We'll have 8 commissioners. Commissioner Kenny, you want to go first?
Sure. So are we getting, are there bonuses that don't have height that depend on the FAR to give value from the height? Or is the FAR just there to accommodate whatever height is given?
So Erica Leak, Neighborhood Housing. The FAR limitations are, in many cases, the base FAR limitation is intended to make sure that the bonus has the maximum potential to have the most affordable units derived from those bonuses.
So in those cases, in the base, it is an artificial limiter so that we can give more in the bonus?
It is a limiter so that we can get as many affordable units as we can.
Okay. And so does that mean that the FARs in the bonuses, I was just wondering why we don't have them in MSs, but we do have them in the other zone categories.
I don't know the answer to that one offhand.
Sorry, so your question is, can you say that one more time?
Why do we have no FAR in the bonus zone, or the bonuses for MS, or yes, MS, but not for RM or MU?
So originally we started with MS as it's a Main Street zone, and we wanted it to closely mimic what you get out of VMU today, which is unlimited density. And so they don't have a base density. That was a feeling that we should just allow that by right, because that was what we wanted to get out of it. When we worked with our consultant in particular on the MS3 zone, they recommended putting a limit on the density in that zone to allow the bonus to give you more units, and it was based on their analysis of that specific zone.
Right, but I think somebody, and it may have been you, have said earlier that in the MU and RM zones that the FAR is intended to be generous enough that it's not a limiter in the bonus. Okay.
Right.
Great. And can I ask about cottage court form? I've been hearing a lot of complaints that cottage court is not viable on lots smaller than like 8,000 square feet. And that just that amount of courtyard and stuff. Do you want to respond to that?
So the lot sizes are, of course, the minimum lot sizes required for really any of the uses. So it's possible that there are zones for sure where you can get some uses out of them. Like one zone, a lot might be a certain size, and you can get a duplex or a single-family house, but you can't get a cottage court out of it.
Mr. Dutton, I'm gonna cut you off just because I have
Sure.
one question remaining. I've lost it.
TikTok.
We had the cottage court. Is there an existing zone? So RM1. Is there existing multifamily that got mapped to RM1 that might be a reason not to give it that full 60% IC at its base? Because like it's getting it now and that would be a down zone? Or is RM1 all transition zone? Did anything get mapped to RM1 that's on the ground right now? Because you've heard what we've said about graduating the IC and using it as an incentive for the bonus.
Yes, there is existing SF6 that has RM1.
Is an SF6 45%?
I don't believe so. I don't remember.
I think it is. I think SF5 was more. SF6 went back to 45.
Forgive me, I don't remember the SF6 impervious cover at this moment.
All right, so SF6, but not RM, not MF.
Yeah, so there is, just to be clear, there is R4 and RM1, those zones that were used for transition area mapping that are also zoned on properties that are not in that transition areas because of current entitlements, SF5.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Other commissioners? Non-residential zones, Commissioner Shea, then Shaw.
Okay, so I'm going to go right back to the SF6 question because if it is, I'm trying to understand what SF6 got changed into, and currently it shows here at one point, Mr. Dutton told me it was like RM2, and it looks like you guys are changing that it's RM1, but RM1 is still set as per lot versus an SF5 and 6 is per acre. So how does that translate to RM1? Or should RM1 be adjusted to reflect units per acre option?
So originally, RM1 was units per acre at one point, and then after we did testing, it didn't really work that way. It needed to be units per lot to make it work in the transition zones. So it's different for sure than SF 6 is today, but I think it's probably the closest thing.
Understand, but where's our SF5 and 6 tool anymore? Does it exist?
It really, the 12 units per acre that you get out of SF5 and 6 is probably closest to either RM1.
But the issue with
or
per
RM2.
lot is now you have to do preliminary plan. It's got to, we have to do subdivisions. I mean, the whole point of it, once you get to larger lot, is gone if we limit it to, into these small lots. So we need a units per acre. That's what translates to S5 and 6. I don't see that tool here.
Yeah, I mean, RM2 is units per acre, but it is higher units per acre than you'd get out of SF5 and 6.
So it sounds like we don't have a good translation for that.
There's no direct analog for it.
So the next question is site plan exemptions. We have something, and right now a lot of things are zoned a certain way, and now it's zoned differently. But that use might have existed. Let's say it's a single-family home on a corridor, and it has a commercial use, but it's still a house. What happens with site plan exemptions now? Is it still the same process? Or, for instance, impervious cover went up and the use is different, so is it still change of use site plan exemption? Is this still a simple process, or are we, I don't know where we're at. What is that now?
Yes, a change of there instead of exemptions in the site plan in what was the site plan chapter, the site plan exemption is now called limited permit, but it's still, the point is being a small process, a small, quick process for a change of use from a permitted use to a permitted use. And
so is it still like 1,000 square foot that they can change? Like impervious on, say, a small house that's turning into an office use. We had something that was built to like 45 impervious, and it's a corridor thing of 60%.
Right. I think the numbers are exactly the same, if not extremely similar, on the list of things that are eligible for the limited limited permit. And if you're going from a permitted use to a permitted use, you meet those requirements.
Okay, so it's still a simple use, like somebody, a homeowner or whatever, a business that can and they can sit down with you guys and work
yes,
it out.
we're just calling it a limited permit because exemption is misleading because we're giving you a piece of paper to permit you to do the thing for which you ask.
Okay, next question. Parking maximums, it sounds like the process working group was saying not to eliminate parking maximums. Is that correct? Just want to verify. Eliminate parking maximum on that corridor?
It has been clarified that we did not reach a conclusion on that.
Okay.
But the process group has a session on it.
Oh, got
Save it for later.
Okay, well then my comment on that would be that in talking with a lot of business owners that would want to locate on the corridors, if you don't provide the parking, they will go out of business. That's what I've heard. They need that parking for it to exist in talking with a lot of these smaller businesses. And I'm just telling you what they're telling me. The other thing is we have examples of, for instance, like South Congress with Hop Dotties, with that parking garage. It's kind of like a regional parking. So this way it can pick up the excess that people need as they come and go. Does the code that we have, is it limiting the ability to create like this kind of this regional or, parking? So that way other uses can actually not have to even worry about the parking. Again, it's still paid parking.
Staff can stand up if I'm wrong, but I believe that regional parking is allowed for corridors and commercial zones. District parking, sorry.
Right, district. Let's go talk district parking.
I'm going to have to look it up here, but it's called a parking facility in the new code.
And does it, it would be a waste to put it on the corridor. I can see it on the next lot. Again, the example, we have like Hop Dotties on South Congress that works well, and also even Alamo Draft House on South Lamar. People park there, they go different places in there, and they actually leave from there again, and it's not on a corridor frontage.
So parking facility is allowed in the upper MU zones. It's permitted, or it's a conditional use permit.
Upper MU. So we got to map it.
Question for staff on compatibility. Notice that there's some zones that have 50-foot and then go to full height, and some that go to 100. Can you explain why the difference between the different zoning categories and the different compatibility standards?
So the thinking there was that in some zones it's 100, but for the zones that are typically more on the corridors, like the MU zones that may or may not have the transitions behind them, they would have a lower number for that compatibility. So if they don't have transitions behind them, they won't get squashed, basically, or to the same degree.
Okay. And this may be a question for the working group. Did you all have any concerns that the way they mapped MU5, even on lots that because of width or depth would support full entitlements? I know last time we wanted them to go back and kind of right size their
We
zones.
didn't look at the map.
Okay, you didn't look at the map. Okay. Okay. And then on current requirements for distance from, this is a staff question on bars and maybe restaurants that serve alcohol. Isn't there a distance requirement from residential uses? I don't know if that's for outdoor only or could you speak to kind of the distance requirements?
So if there's a bar with the late night permit, which was called level 2 in draft 3, if they're within 200 feet of our residential house scale zone, it's a conditional use.
Okay, so that would be picked up at site plan. You would look at the distance and it would be forced a CUP approval process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And in
Okay.
today's code, it's parking for a CUP that within 200 feet. That is a compatibility waiver.
So it's from the parking area, not the building structure of the bar?
In today's code, if you're a CUP related to bars, it's the parking within 200 feet.
Okay. And then a similar question, there's a reference to a state law in that same section. I can pull it up if I need to, but do you offhand know what that actually requires? It talks about Texas alcohol.
It's probably referencing the distance requirements for alcohol sales from churches and schools.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, thanks.
Yanis Pulido, then Anderson.
Okay, I hope I can remember my questions. I don't see Anik Baudet here tonight, but I heard something secondhand, I think, in one of our public working group sessions, so I just wanted to clarify it. Somebody said that Anik had said that there would not be parking requirements eliminated in places where there are no sidewalks in the adjacent streets, and that seems conflicting with other stuff that I'm reading. I was just wondering if somebody could clarify that. And while you're coming up here, I'll just say there's a lot of concern around walkability for that, especially in areas like Travis Heights where it's real hilly and there's blind curves.
So I think Brent Lloyd, I think the council direction was to eliminate minimum parking within a quarter mile of a corridor, except where to do so would be particularly disruptive. And in developing sort of criteria to give that meaning, I think where we landed at, and I'm just going to paraphrase, I'm tired, I think I'm not going to use quite the correct terminology, but the essence of it was if there's an area that doesn't have sidewalks, it would still be eligible for the parking reduction if it's programmed to have sidewalks in the near future. If basically it's on the high priority list of areas to receive sidewalk funding, then it would be eligible for the parking reduction.
Okay, in the high priority as a category, or is there a threshold?
It's a category. I mean, it's a geographical areas that are programmed to have that funding available to build sidewalks in the near term.
Okay, near term being?
I cannot quote I can follow up with you and get you that information.
Okay, yeah, no, that would be great. I just want to be sure that we're tactically being strategic, because I know that the idea of having a more walkable city, people being less car dependent is to be more walkable, but in a situation where most people are still having to use cars if they have them and park them, it's extremely dangerous. If there are no sidewalks and there's cars parked on both sides, it becomes really hard for folks to actually walk around. And that's the biggest concern I'm hearing is around walkability. So just something to look at. Another thing is, I don't know, this is kind of bleeding into residential, but it has to do with corridors. I'm not really sure. I have trouble understanding why preservation and protection strategies are not prioritized by our staff in this. And the reason is that, I have the privilege right now to be part of a fellowship with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and the Center for Community Investment. And so I'm going to other places, and now through climate resilience work with the CDC Foundation, I'm meeting people all over the country. And when I describe the kind of housing that exists in places that are so vulnerable to gentrification, it's like clear as day to people that you need preservation and not upzoning. And I am struggling with why that is so low on our list in terms of, you have preservation, protection, and production in that order, because it is so hard to get affordable units through production, as evidenced by the projections we have in this code. And we see a lot of the truly affordable units coming through negotiations and community benefit. And so, like, if I describe District 2 to somebody and I say, we have the highest rate of home ownership in the lowest income area, it's like immediately somebody, I've had like a professor from Maryland tell me, and like all kinds of, like everybody that I know that is working in housing strategies in Texas where you don't have inclusionary zoning, you don't have rent control, et cetera, they're going, what you need is preservation. You need to do everything you can to preserve where people are and not upzone. And I'm just struggling with where that is. And I guess my question is, why is preservation and protection not being used? Why is production-centric strategy being used in these vulnerable places where we have evidence it increases displacement? And do you have any idea, like, is there a projection of how many affordable rentals and homes we're going to lose with these strategies that we can't get back through production nearly as efficiently? Erica was helping me out with some strategy around multifamily the other day in a meeting, but it's just like, I feel like as soon as I get out of Austin, this is like, boom, obvious, and it just feels like a complete different conversation here.
Erica, I'm going to warn you, you have 11 seconds.
Sorry, Erica. So do I have 11 seconds? Is that
Yes.
what it means? Okay, so basically it was based on the council criteria of how they said to map the transition zones. Can I finish?
Yes.
Okay. But I think one thing that Planning Commission may very well want to consider is, that the criteria resulted in more areas in central and especially East Austin that had a lot of corridors. So even though the corridors were mapped, with fewer units, fewer parcels with transition zones off those corridors, because there were more corridors in East Austin, it ends up covering what looks like at least a larger percentage of that area. And so I think it is a very good question for Planning Commission to consider, is there an equitable dispersion of those transition areas in different parts of town? And so if we look at what percentage of the map in vulnerable areas is covered by transition areas and what portion of a map is in the high opportunity areas is covered with transition areas, I think that would be something that this group should consider. And it didn't turn out that way because of the council criteria, but it may be that it wasn't clear what that would result in, and so perhaps there needs to be further direction on that matter.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Anderson.
It is interesting going around the country and talking to folks about Austin's housing policy and whatnot. Commissioner Howard and I happened to be at the National Housing Conference about a year ago, and it was pretty evident by a lot of folks that would come up and talk to us about the amazing growth that Austin's had, whether we like it or not, and just our total inability to update our land development code in a significant way over the last 30 years, and how those two things crash into total loss of affordability. But that's what we're working on here. Commissioner Connor, something you mentioned that I want to bring up right now, kind of concern me, is the setbacks, potential new setbacks kind of up in the air. And then you mentioned Uno, I think you did, as a good example. And I just want to remind you, we actually eliminated that setback not that long ago.
We eliminated a stair step, but we left the single 12-foot step back in place at 60 feet of height.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're not going to look at the angle.
Not
It's a
stair
single-
stepping, no. It's just to create more air and light on the street, a single step back. And that's actually been adopted, I've seen in some other cities, as a way of getting more air and light into the street. It makes it more human scale.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if we're just talking about 90-foot buildings, I mean, I live 2 blocks from here. I'm surrounded by buildings, and I promise you there's plenty of air and light, but we can talk about that. I just worry about it's another roof, it's a transition floor, it's complications, it's cost. Something to think through.
Yeah, I guess in the joint codes and ordinances, the testimony that we got, I think you were there, was that requirement worked fine and that everybody was happy with it. It was just the continuing step back that was a problem.
Anyone else? Commissioner Seeger?
I have a question, and the quarter mile comes up in many instances, and I'd like to know how it's measured. Is it by how the route actually needs to be taken in order to get to a corridor, or is it by the crow flies? Block length, is that taken into consideration? Cul-de-sacs and how you have to traverse many of our design non-grid patterns? Just how did you get to the quarter mile?
The quarter mile of what? I'm sorry.
The
can you-
measurement, say, for something that's walkable if it's within the quarter mile, so you don't need parking, et cetera.
Are you speaking to the parking reduction, or are you speaking to
let's say I'm talking to how was the quarter mile to the quarter measured, whether it's parking or whatever.
Okay, so in general, the definition of a quarter mile is as the grackle flies.
As the grackle, so it's straight line measurement?
When you're talking generally, yeah. I mean, we've looked at other things as far as the walk shed. That's a different analysis. It's looking at the actual network and connectivity.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about identifiers or just what's within a distance as the grackle flies, that is just a straight distance measurement. So it depends on what the factor is you're looking at.
Okay, say for reduced parking, because the assumption is anyone can walk a quarter mile, which I may not agree with, but let's go with that assumption that anyone can walk a quarter mile. So it's a quarter mile straight to the corridor, not the route that someone has to take in order to have non-reduced parking.
Yes, I believe the parking reduction is the actual as the grackle flies buffer, and that's why we had that further direction to look at other ways to make sure that we were looking at the sidewalk criteria as part of if an area is not as walkable as it could be, and parking minimums or the reduction of parking minimums maybe not be as far reduced.
Okay, and was the walkable score of an area taken into consideration for this quarter mile?
No, again, the quarter mile, at least as far as the parking reduction, is a
right.
very just as the grackle
Just-
flies.
that's
It
the
isn't
only thing that was
the
taken
walk
into
score was not as part of that criteria,
Okay.
but it's a great conversation to have.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners? We've got one more working group to go. Okay, hearing nothing further. Commissioner Thompson, before we do that, can we extend the time? Can we say 11 p.m. so we're not wasting time voting on extending?
Sure.
Okay, motion by Seeger, second by Kenny. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed?
Can we also take a break at this point?
Okay.
Quick one.
Okay, we'll be back at 9:50. That's 7 minutes. Let's get started with the presentation for the process working group. Thank you. We've got a quorum on the dais, so Commissioner Thompson, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'll start with my 10. So we wanted to talk about a few things first. So site plan light, parking maximums, alternative compliance, the sort of back to greenfield settings, and then sunset F25, although we maybe already talked about that. So site plan light, we talked about a few things. First, we talked about the size of the project. And so these are just some areas of concerns. We don't actually have the recommendations or amendments yet. But currently it's 3 to 8. And I guess, one of the ideas is, the transition area, the bonus is 5 to 10. So if we're trying to get more missing middle in that 5 to 10, then, maybe 1 through 4 should not actually even require a site plan light and should just be building permits, especially if the idea of the 1 through 4 is basically house form. And if it's going to be the same size of the house, then maybe it shouldn't need a site plan. The timing, we talked to a handful of residential developers, and they already think that just getting a permit is like the longest, most drawn-out part of their process, and it's a 3-month process. If a site plan light adds 3 months to that, and 3 months is probably pretty good for a site plan light, and they're just not going to take it. So they're just not going to take the bonus, and especially if it's you get 2, they're going to, if it's an R4, they're just going to put the big duplex on it and scrape the lot. So I think the idea is, if we want people to take the affordable unit bonus, then the whole time permits plus site plan light needs to be sort of compatible to what permits are today. So maybe this could be some sort of expedited review or something like that. That's the only way they're going to get to take the permit, the bonus. The scope, it doesn't really talk too much about what the scope of the site plan light is, and should we list the areas that we think should the focus be, maybe safety and, but not traffic impact, whatever we decide. And then should there be a subdivision light? So for, a smaller area, for smaller units, less than an acre, 6 units or 6 lots, something like that, a subdivision light that could also go through quickly. The next thing was parking maximums. We've talked about that some. So right now, I think the downtown parking maximum is like 1.10 of what the normal minimum would be. That's what it is for downtown. The new proposed is 1.25 of what the normal minimum standards were on a corridor or a center, but 1.75 throughout the entire city. And I think the idea is that, as we understand it, banks, require parking a lot of times in the current formulas. And if we require this parking on the corridors, they just won't build it. It just won't happen. The cons are, it could push, by requiring it, it could push that development off, somewhere else. These aren't really the pros and cons. Somehow I messed up. The pros are, it gets us back to, to if we don't ever push people, they'll never change the pattern. And so that was sort of the idea.
If I could just jump in to help with that comment, I think that a good example to think of is grocery stores are often required to be overparked. But there's grocery stores that are coming up with a new urban model that would fit into these areas. So the fear is that, we wouldn't get grocery stores in this area. But I think it's more they have to rethink, if they want to be in that area where the business is, what that looks like.
So we thought about, some of the things that we could do is say, all above ground parking over maximum counts against FAR in corridors. and it must be a standalone structure or something like this. So some of the things that we talked about are standalone, far, or above ground, and somehow come up with a formula about that. Maybe everything that's over the maximum counts against FAR or something like that. Alternative compliance. So we talked some with draft 3 about a minimal development yield. So if you have all of these different things hitting on you, that it turns out that the only place you can actually build your house is this little 10 by 10 square in the middle of the lot. Was there something else that you could do? And so the idea was that first we'd have a clear priority of alternatives. So again, safety never gets waived. Floodplains never get waived. Trees might be critical, and setback might be optimal. So it's kind of, you go down on the priority, and then sort of some clear qualifications. If it's a percentage of the critical root zone of a heritage tree is within, a key sort of building area or something like that, that you would have this idea that, well, if that's the case, then you can put a 10% deviation on your setback or something like that, so you can get up to 60% of what your, sort of a clean lot entitlement might be, or something like that. But to sort of work through what an alternative compliance would be. So going back to greenfield, currently, in the current code, you just have to sort of do no extra harm when it comes to, sort of runoff and water control, whereas in the new code, you have to get back to what greenfield development, or what a greenfield would look like. So that can, the good things is that can certainly reduce our impervious cover, because sometimes, we're going to have some extra real green fields out there to cover this. I think, as we've heard, impervious cover isn't just about flooding, it's about stream health, making sure that the springs are healthy, and it sort of stops the immediate erosion and keeps a constant flow. And it's good for the wildlife, it's good for all kinds of things. The compromise is, well, even if we did something like 50% of greenfield, that's better than what it is today. So, if it's too strong, is it just going to discourage people from rebuilding these surface parking lots that have no water controls whatsoever? So we don't want to discourage redevelopment. It can actually discourage walkability if you have large detention areas that you can't build anything on. That just sort of puts the buildings further apart. And if you're doing that in the corridors, it can really discourage walkability. So could we have something like, well, it's 50% today, or, only on the corridors, or we only exempt, surface parking lots. We don't exempt buildings, or, we could exempt it if it's affordable or something like that. So again, some sort of affordability formula that we can, look into. The next thing, sunset F25s. We already talked about this a little bit, but the longer we go, the harder it's going to be. Staff's going to lose. We're going to lose staff over time who are experienced in F25. It's going to become smaller and smaller a percentage of what we do. As pieces get rezoned and things like that. So the sunset process could look like something like, for all the properties, come up with the nearest equivalent, and we could also provide, maybe waivers for property owners who are wanting to do a change, from an F25 to something, current that would encourage people to go ahead and make that switch, so that when, if we said, oh, it all runs out in 10 years or 15 years or something like that, that hopefully we had very little of it by that time. There were some other concerns that we just, wanted to sort of talk to staff about. We didn't really have any recommendations or anything. So there's no land status determination, it looks like, so right now, if you have a lot that's not legal, you can say, oh, but I was getting, utilities before, I think, 1995 or something like that, and you can become basically a legal lot. And it looks like there's not that process anymore. There's no appeal of building permits anymore. These are just concerns that we heard from the community. The quasi-judicial appeal doesn't really offer ability to negotiate. It's just, you're not even allowed to sort of lobby the entities involved. And we're not quite sure what the future of conditional overlays are. So 2 seconds left.
Good timing. Well, Brent, we'll give you a chance to respond. Let me just finish with the working group members. Any others want to chime in? Go ahead.
Just that I'm hoping to get a chance to look with Mr. Hempel at particularly the tree standards there, and look at if we need to have a provision for the stuff, especially along corridors or in transition zones or something like that, to pull those trees forward to shade the sidewalks. And then I was asked about the site plan light is really a consideration, and I'm struggling a little bit with how to find the guidance on how we can kind of exempt entire departments and entire chapters from that process. Because I do think it's important that it just not get routed to a department in order to cut down the time on that. And then I was wondering, is there a problem with, or is there, and I guess we could give staff a chance to respond after?
No, not yet.
No, not yet. Okay. One of the things I'm interested in looking at, we are very concerned about the site plan light and it enabling us to have properties take those bonuses and not serving as a disincentive to take bonuses. And one of the things that I've looked at is, could we just make it something that's only eligible if you're taking the bonus? I'm not sure that I'm committed to that idea, but I want to make sure we get those bonuses. And then I'm also concerned about that the staff direction was to provide flexibility on corridors, and I'm not seeing a lot of that in the draft.
So, Commissioners, the working group presentation and the working group members speaking are just so you can get an idea of what they found, and then you can come up with your questions. So we'll have staff answer the questions when you ask them the questions. Right now, working group members can still have 3 minutes to kind of add what they've found. No? Okay. All right, let's start the round robin then. Is there anyone that wants to go first?
Start with those questions.
Okay.
Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Lloyd, the questions you already heard?
Site plan light, finding inspiration on where to just cut entire subchapters or departments out of the review there, and then the idea of making it maybe eligible only for the bonuses, and then what Mr. Thompson talked about with making sure that the units and maybe the impervious cover as well for RM1 correspond with the bonus.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions in the mix. I'm just going to try to hit some of them. Commissioner Kinney, I think that if the goal is to not have an application go to a particular department, then then it should be specified that the regulations that department administers don't apply to a project. One of the themes of this code is to be more clear about what requirements apply to what type of development, and to place less emphasis on application categories and procedures. And as Donna said, the code sends a strong message that staff should be asking applicants to provide what's needed to review their project. And I think it's difficult in some ways to regulate process to the degree that I think you may be seeking to do. But we are committed to making improvements, and we feel that this code sets the stage for a more scaled, proportionate review process. Another question, I'm just going to start responding to stuff I've heard. Commissioner Thompson.
Since this is my time, can I ask that you address the idea of using site plan light? First of all, changing both the impervious cover and the unit count to correspond with the R4 and RM1 bonuses, and then the idea of maybe limiting it to just properties that take a bonus?
So there is no there are no varying degrees of site plan. There's no site plan lanes in the proposed code.
Site plan review.
There are regulations that apply to smaller numbers of units, and then there is a regulation that requires that staff scale submittal requirements based on what applies.
Talking about the subchapter that says site review limited.
Right. So, limited plan review, that's another word for exemption. That's just site plan exemptions.
That's not site plan.
So over in 23.6, that's a new name for site plan exemption. In 23.2, there is a section about particular, I believe, like drainage regulations that apply differently based on the number of units.
So I guess I'm talking about the 3 to 8 unit option.
So that is just, if you're doing 3 to 8, these are different regulations that apply. And then it's not saying this is a site plan light or a site plan heavy or any particular lane. In fact, we think that that is causing some of the ultimate delays is that, in today's world,
and I'm sorry to be interrupting. I have 2 minutes. But I am thinking in the direction of what Mr. Lloyd is saying. Like, if we want to make that process limited and clear, instead of governing process, maybe go ahead and just exempt whole things that apply to it. Right now, it's capped at 8 units and 50%, which would mean that RM1 has to go through full site plan review with all the applicable.
No, it would, not full review. We're required to scale our submittal requirements based on what applies. So if a regulation, if you don't want a particular department to be reviewing this, you would have to go into those regulations that department administers
I'm
and
buying
then
into
say
that process.
it doesn't, this doesn't apply to.
I'm totally buying into that.
Okay.
And my question is one, is there an unforeseen problem with bumping the unit count on that up to 10 or 11, so it includes RM1, including the IC up to 60%? And is there a problem with saying that you only actually have this option if you take a bonus?
I think these are drainage regulations. I don't know what. We would have to look at all of the regulations that are changed for those and what the contributing factors are. So there was a lot of pieces that went into that.
This is something that I think is a really, really high concern and is like a top 3 item for I think more than just myself. Because what we're hearing from the building community is if that process is cumbersome, I'm not taking my bonus. I'm building my 2 units or even 4 units or whatever. Or I'm not taking the bonus on RM1. I'm just going to take the 6 because I need the IC. So I think we really need some work on this, or at least good answers on why we can't do this. Is it clear what I'm going for? Mm-hmm. Okay. Because RM1 has that 60% IC. Right now it's limited to 50%. RM1 has 10 units. Right now it's limited to 8 units.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Thompson, did you want to do your questions or did you want to wait?
I want to wait.
Okay. Commissioner Shaw?
On the drainage questions, so on this idea of when the site plan review, and maybe we need to know about the difference on the 3 to 8 units, it gets exempted from. We already talked about this, from a number of draining regulations, correct? And
I think if you stick at 50%, you are exempted.
And then once you go to 60. It gets reviewed, but are the requirements different at that time? Yes, because you have to either, and you said typically you want them to put money into like RSMP or something like that,
right?
Rather than build small units on site. Is
that rather than build like a small detention pond on site,
okay.
Correct?
So my concern, and I really want to pursue this, but that we might be missing out on the funds to make improvements if we move the bar. So I'm actually thinking, what if something can be done for all these units, it's expedited, but they all participate in the funding, and it's just more, it doesn't need a lot of review. There's some amount of money that goes into the drainage fund, 3 to whatever, and it's made very simple. So the review is curtailed. We know we're not advocating for on-site detention anyway, so just put money into the fund so that we can make these improvements. Anyway, I think there's a way we can streamline this and get what we want, but not miss out on the funding for the infrastructure improvements. So, Matt, just do you have concerns about bumping up to 60? I know you were following council direction, but if we do bump this up to 60% and it all goes through this limited site plan review process, what would be the concerns from an actual, the issues, localized flooding? I know we've gone through this before, but just what would that present as far with that 10% increase?
I think when you go to the 60, we're just going to see more pressure on the drainage systems and make sure that water gets off the site properly, make sure it gets to an approved location. It's just not looking as much like a single-family project anymore. It's looking more like obviously a small multifamily project, which needs more care, more oversight in our view. That's why we were recommending the non-streamlined drainage process. I mean, it's streamlined in a way. It's not having to do on-site detention, but it would have to do. We are recommending that a professional engineer would look at that. Would look at the drainage at 60,
okay,
and not necessarily at 50.
Okay. And then real quick, are there other innovative things besides these large fields for detention that developers can use to kind of reduce the amount of water that has to be treated, or to, we've heard of underground treatment. What things can be done to lessen that impact to their site, the site area they can develop?
Assuming you need to do something on site, you could use parking lot detention. You see these around town. The curbs are raised a little bit. It's actually pretty innocuous. You're essentially using your parking lot literally as a detention pond, but it functions exactly the same. Let's see. I'm assuming we're still focusing on these very small sites, which I don't think would have the if it's above a half an acre, you're going to start to see some folks use a vault if they did have to have detention.
So my question is shifting back to the greenfield argument that we were looking at greenfield and reducing the requirements for greenfield. So it's shifting over to that subject matter.
Okay.
Sorry, we're just racing.
Sure, no, that's good.
So in that vein, for larger site detention areas, are there things that could be done to reduce the impact on the development? And you just said there are parking lots,
sure,
underground.
Right.
Anything else? Can you collect water off your site and hold it in other ways, like rainwater collection?
That's kind of shading into the water quality side of things, where you're retaining water as opposed to just slowing it down and detaining it.
Okay. Do you have any concerns? So I know the Barton Creek, I think there were some ideas about trying to get development on parking lots because maybe it was from the water quality perspective that we were having issues with these large lots. But with the approach you heard here, with maybe allowing some reduced amount of impervious cover that needs to be treated, not going back to greenfield, do you have any concerns about that?
I see. So maybe trying to strike some midpoint between going all the way back down to zero versus where you are now. So it's just going to be, clearly that's a policy call. You're going to proportionately reduce the drainage benefits. We've always known that this is going to be, a new cost on these projects. So this is, we're in this spot where we're trying to calibrate this. I work for Watershed. I think this is a great idea on the detention and flood management side. But you guys are correctly identifying this as something that, that it affects the viability of the project. We think this can be done in some ways that can work on sites, and also we're going to be ramping up that regional stormwater option as well to help with flexibility.
Okay, and last question: do all watersheds have regional stormwater treatment that's effective in managing? When they contribute to the fund, does it handle the flooding issues, or do some areas not have RSMP?
Our RSMP used to be limited to certain watersheds. With the new structure we have now, it is in all. It could be used in all watersheds. You can take that money, and so there are unfortunately enough problems. We're not going to, run out of problems to solve. But basically, it is a flexible way of addressing very targeted things in different watersheds.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Shea.
Matt, I still have questions for you. So something that you talked about, and I want to hear more about. You've been talking about the plumbing code, lot-to-lot flooding, and previously, draft 3, it was an engineer's letter that we went back and forth on. So I feel like what you're talking about is alluding to something like that, but it seems like you're working on it, but I don't know where it's at. Can you tell us a little bit more what that is and where it's
Sure. Okay, good question. So basically, in draft 3 of Code Next, we looked at would it be advisable for us to look at when single-family residential or missing middle projects were coming through? Would we want to see those folks, use an engineer certification process where they would go out, get an engineer, look at the site, make sure things are good, send in a letter. That had a number of flaws. We actually benchmarked that with some other communities and didn't think that was a good approach. Right. What we're proposing now with the plumbing code is basically very targeted. Frankly, it will be a more reactive approach. We know that there's 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 of these permits going through every year. Most of them don't have drainage problems associated with them. They look like the next single-family property next door, and the water goes to the road or the alley, and things are okay. But every now and then, something goes wrong. Somebody makes a mistake in their design or what have you, in the implementation. And so this is going to allow us to have the city be able to go in either prior to the certificate of occupancy and stop the project and say, you need to fix this, or after the project's done, if the problems don't show up until then, we would engage our code department.
I think that's great. I mean, I've actually seen that in practice with the inspectors between neighbors and stuff like that. Somebody comes in. So
much more targeted.
Exactly. I think that's great. The other question is, it sounded like the fee that we'd be paying into watershed. I mean, is there a way, and this is also to address some type of localized flooding and inadequate infrastructure. We have rough proportionality that deals with transportation aspects. Is there a way to to measure that the way a development is taxing something and they pay their pro rata share of increase of that? Is that a process that I know Commissioner Shaw?
These are proportionate. That's a great question. So those are the fees are very much proportionate. It has to do with the size of your lot and the amount of impervious cover you have. That would relate to the payment you would make to RSMP. So if you had a big site, it'd be a big payment. If it was a small site, it'd be a small payment.
But it's not targeted to a specific infrastructure repair for that localized area. Because my concern is that money is, you're saying it could be applied anywhere, but if this is to take care of my localized flooding, I paid the money and it's dealing with somebody else's. So is there a way to keep that for improvements for that specific area?
Yes. It must be spent in that watershed. And actually, we don't, for a given project, we don't just say, give us X amount of money. We actually, our engineers will work with the applicant and look around the area and find if there's, missing inlets, missing pipe, upgrades that are simple that fit within that budget to actually ask that project to do those things right around the project.
But that's not with site plan light.
That's not site plan light. Site plan light wouldn't have any of this. It would have simply an obligation to not flood your neighbor and would have the plumbing permit.
But if there's a whole bunch of site plan lights, it could actually tax the system, and then somebody else would be paying more?
Let me elaborate on that. R4 has the full-blown, you wouldn't have to do anything except obviously not flood somebody, and then plumbing code would kick in. Our RM1 would require an engineer to look at the project. And then
unless something happens over here.
That's right.
So the other thing is different types of detention. You said parking lots can be that. I mean, is it like driveways? Let's say somebody was going to design with no curbs, but if they were able to design their inner drive with the curbs, and does that go into the calculations, or could that be used in the calculations in some?
And really, we're talking about larger sites with this kind of thing. We're not going to see a parking lot detention or any detention on something that's smaller than a half an acre. That's going to be a micro pond, which is not particularly effective. Right. So we'd rather have money, or we'd rather you upgrade something. But on a larger project, yes, you could use. But it wouldn't be the driveway. Probably it would be the parking lot itself, or you'd put you could go either underground, or you could go in the parking lot, or you could have a surface pond. You could even, some people have even used a rainwater cistern, like a tank or a vault.
Gotcha. Okay.
Above ground.
So I'm running out of time. So this is back to the working group. Parking garages. So did you guys talk about parking garages with flat plates? So that's the way it's adaptable. If somebody builds parking garages, maybe there's a way you talked about exempting FAR.
We've talked about this. The input from the building community is that those are super hard to build. The one promising thing, and Commissioner Thompson hit on this, was that in the ballpark development. I know that they've been talking about asking them to make some of their big parking detached so it can be demoed. So if it's structured, it's detached, and that is the one thing that seems promising. The flat plates, everyone's saying that's a red herring.
I know it takes more space, right, because you got to have the separate ramps, but
They just say
really,
it's super expensive and takes a lot of space.
They say that it's something like a parking structure only takes 40 pounds per square inch, has to support that, whereas a building has to take 80. So it's just different concrete.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Thompson.
Sorry, Matt, more water stuff. So one thing we've heard some developers say is, what if we had requirements for like a cistern for like one of these R4? Would it help to boost the impervious cover if you had a big tank that was required and they're just part of the permit?
So we have considered this kind of thing in the past. I don't know that we would recommend it ourselves. It is a policy call on that. You're going to be talking about very small scale controls, which have a role, have a function, but it's going to be kind of an oversight issue at that point. Is that thing working? Are we going to be inspecting it, and so forth? So that's going to be a lot of extra verification to make sure that those are working correctly. But use of rain tanks is something we've looked at as an option.
Okay. And I guess another question is, do you have a sort of a response to some of the complaints that we've heard that large detention actually hurts walkability on the corridor because it is just a big blank space? And we heard some people say that like they modeled the Lamar Union, where the Alamo Draft House is, on Draft 3, and it didn't even come close to being able to produce what the Lamar Union does now. And they haven't modeled this one yet. I think they're still planning on doing that in the next week or two. But do you have any comments on that?
I'm not sure about the walkability issue. I think generally you see these things in the back of a project or kind of off on the side. Usually don't see it right up onto the sidewalk. Obviously, the grade of the site is going to make a big difference on that. So I think there's been issues with just how do you integrate this in from a design standpoint. In the past, a lot of these have been kind of, frankly, a little more ugly or a little less compatible with walkability and urban design. That is something that you can improve upon. I'm spacing out on your next question. You had another. The Lamar Union. So yeah, we looked at that. They actually put in a giant vault that was for water quality. They would have had to have another vault for detention in this sort of case. So that would have been a possibility. But again, it is an expense, but it would have provided quite a bit of drainage relief for the project for the community downstream.
Did you have some questions for Brent?
If he wanted to respond to any of the things that I had said earlier.
Let's see. I think
No, for Mr. Lloyd.
For Brent.
Oh, yes, please.
So, Commissioner Thompson, you made a number of points, and I just want to try to address them as quickly as I can. So, with regard to administrative appeals, the code is actually very specific that for building permits, that if it's a technical code issue, you appeal to the appropriate technical code board. That could be the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals. And if it's in connection with zoning regulations, you appeal to the Board of Adjustment. Our current code says nothing about Board of Adjustment appeals in connection with building permits. This code does. I think there is a table that doesn't quite accurately reflect the substantive provision that I just read, and we have that on our list of things to update. But if you read the body of the code, it fully gives appeal rights for building permits beyond what is provided in today's code.
Okay.
Can I just bounce back and forth? On the R4, you're not going to have a cistern. There's no water quality requirement, and there's no flood requirement. So you wouldn't actually trigger any of that stuff. RM1.
Right. I guess one of the questions we'd seen earlier was the impervious cover on
R4
enough to actually get your bonus. And so if you were going to
I see.
up the impervious cover, would a cistern help?
So land status still exists. It's absolutely codified. It's the platting exemptions for older tracts that were never platted but have existed, and they're exactly the same criteria still exists. We think it's more clearly stated than current code. I can follow up with you and give you those citations.
Oh, okay, great.
Commissioner Anderson?
You guys did so much work. I'm so glad I was not on this committee. So a couple quick things. So I love that you guys talked about sunsetting the F-25 because, yeah, that's just going to be this big, weird thing in our code. And you had a good point that as new employees for the city come on, like that's just going to get stranger and stranger. So I wonder if when the time is right, we just think of a way to best do that. I was a hair concerned about the idea of nearest equivalence. And maybe that's just, I mean, I just wonder if there's even better direction to staff, just like, what do you guys feel is the best for this? Because I'm seeing some TODs now that the zoning around the TOD is better and more substantial and does more for the needs of Austin than the TOD itself now. And so I would hope that we could figure out a way to prioritize those and kind of get those going sooner rather than later. I'm also hearing a lot of pushback on the idea of going down to 0 greenfield. I definitely understand the value. But like Commissioner Thompson said, like, are we then almost making it harder to replace a surface parking lot, like the worst thing we have out there in so many ways? And so I'm curious if staff could, at some point, and I don't need an answer, just maybe think about it, create some kind of diagram, because I'm also hearing from the folks that are like, well, you're increasing impervious cover in the transition zones, and that's so bad, and not taking into account like the unbelievable benefits that we're doing on the corridors with the redevelopment there and capturing all this rainwater and water detention, water quality that doesn't exist today. And so I wonder if there's a way to kind of put that into a diagram that might really show the benefits of overall what an area is experiencing through redevelopment. Of course, not happening overnight, but happening slowly. And then last thing, just the units. I was talking about kind of 3 through 8 and what that looks like. The most expensive product I see hitting the market today is a brand new single family home being built in central Austin. And so I don't want to accidentally encourage single family homes, the most expensive like home that we're seeing delivered in central Austin, or duplexes, like especially on parcels that could have been a triplex or a quadplex. And so I wonder if there's some kind of way to think through that, like maybe 1 through 5 does a route, and then 6 through 11, like whatever, along with the bonuses, makes the most sense. And I don't know if that needs to be us that kind of looks into that a little bit more. But the idea of just 3 through 8, I love your ideas of trying to see what can we do to hit up to 11, but also why stop at 3? Why not have that process be something else that is a bit more equitable for different sizes of development? And yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Commissioner Howard?
Not sure if this is adding value or not, but I figure I'd underscore a few things. I think the whole discussion about the site plan light is pretty interesting, and I think this is the 6th city I've worked in. I think every city wants to do some sort of expedited permitting of some sort, for affordability or otherwise for something else. But I think that it may be too much pressure on the staff or for us to assume that the code in and of itself might be just the answer for that. But I do believe that much time needs to be spent thinking about how we can actually execute that, because I realize that it's much harder than being a staffer. I know it's much harder than what we all believe it sounds to be, and I think that we need to continue to spend time thinking about that, because it does make a big difference when you're talking about a potential development occurring or not occurring, and now we're talking about incentivizing development where it may not likely occur. I think that in both cases, I think we need to consider how we might try to figure that out. And then I think, obviously not to discourage density where we want density to be directed. Affordability, in my opinion, I think I was talking to some of the other colleagues, that the true dent in affordability will be accomplished more likely through some greenfield development. And don't get me wrong, I don't say that we're trying to create greater density is not the answer, but I know that it's going to take some additional incentives to really address the affordability issue. So I feel like the idea of looking at greenfield, as others have discussed, is something that we should continue to explore in terms of how we can incentivize affordable housing. Obviously not wanting to put situations whereby there's not access to goods and services, and obviously that's always a concern. But I do believe that we could continue to think about how we can incentivize more development in green fields to address the affordability issue. So those are two things I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Anyone else? Okay, so we still have a couple of items to take care of. Staff, thank you for being here at this late hour. I just want to say for the record, the working group work that's been done so far is presenting their findings in the hope that some of those will be submitted in the form of amendments and we would vote on them. None of the work that we presented last week or this week is set in stone. We're just discussing and presenting the findings from the working groups. A couple of items that we have to still address. October 26th are rules for the public hearing on that day. There's a sheet on in front of you that reads closed public hearing, continued public hearing, and testimony on the deliberation item on a subsequent day. So this is about October 26th and what happens after we close the public hearing on that day. Is that correct?
Chair, Commissioner Liaison Andrew Vera, that is correct. It's once you close the public hearing and the testimony thereafter.
Okay. So this is addressing if there are folks that show up on the 26th and they speak, and also the ones that show up or that can't show up on the 26th and are not able to speak. So if they show up and at a subsequent meeting when we're ready to take votes on amendments, if they haven't had a chance to speak on the 26th, they're given 2 minutes. And if they did speak on 26th and they still want another turn on the day that we're taking votes on amendments, they get 1 minute. So that's item A. Item B is what is item B? Let me take a look here.
Chair, Commissioner Liaison Andrew Vera. So B is just if for some reason we need to continue the public hearing Saturday.
Okay. So if they're signed in by 1 p.m. and we run out of time, then if we're passing out and we run out of time, then we're going to continue it on Sunday. That's what item B is. Is that correct? Is there any discussion on this item?
I don't have a discussion on the item, but on the time. Is it 10 to 2 on Saturday?
It's at 9 a.m.
9 a.m. Oh.
9 a.m. is.
So commissioners, Andrew sent us an email about this. It starts at 9 a.m. Sign up starts at 8:30. They can start speaking at 9 a.m. So that's first for the boards and commissions, and then we take speakers that are already signed up. We take the folks can sign in until 1 p.m. and then we go on as long as we can. We're going to maintain.
And we can come and go.
We're going to maintain quorum as long as we can, and once we don't have quorum, we're going to. And if there's still folks signed up, we're going to take it on the next day.
Chair, are we just opening with the first person to sign up, or is there going to be some sort of presentation from staff or from you or someone else in that?
It's going to be we're going to just take testimony. It won't be anything else.
Okay.
Were we providing time for other boards and commissions at the beginning?
That's right.
At 9 a.m.
Okay.
So if they're done early, are we going to start citizen communication early?
If there's citizens there, we're going to start.
Great.
Anything else on A and B? Any discussion? Commissioner Yanez Pulido?
As much as I really don't like being here this late and don't want to extend our meetings, I do think people should have 3 minutes to speak on item, if they did not come to the public hearing, if they haven't testified. And I just want to make a comment in regard to Commissioner Anderson's reference of the report on neighborhood planning. As few people as may have participated in the neighborhood planning process relative to people, who live in the total neighborhood, I guarantee it was far more than have had an opportunity to weigh in on this process, which is moving so fast. And I still talk every day to people who don't even know that Code Next is back, that this revision is back. It's happening incredibly fast, and it's slated to be voted on, as usual, around the holidays when people have the hardest time even paying attention. And I just, as painful as this process is, I was talking about how it kind of reminds me of redistricting in 10-1 when we were meeting 3 times a week for 3 hours at a time for months. It's massive. I mean, all the things that are coming up are really critical places where we can make mistakes that are harder to undo or where we have unintended consequences. And I know how hard it is to articulate your thoughts in 3 minutes. Obviously, people always run out of time, and I think we owe it to the public to allow at least the full 3 minutes if they haven't gotten to speak. I'm okay with giving people, less time if they already did and they're just coming back. But if this is the first time they're getting to speak, I really think they need the 3 minutes.
I agree. I'll second
Okay,
that.
thank you.
I agree.
Is there any other discussion?
Can I ask why you would get 2 minutes on Saturday but 3 minutes on Sunday?
No.
So A is if they didn't sign up and they didn't get a chance to speak.
It's after Saturday. It's if they come.
And after Sunday.
Yeah.
And after Sunday.
Good. And Saturday is 3 minutes.
Saturday's 3 minutes.
Sunday's 3 minutes because it's a carryover.
Correct. Commissioner Schneider?
Just to clarify, so we've invited other boards and commissions to start us off on Saturday morning at 9. Is that a different sort of process than the public process? And what I mean by that is, will we be able to ask questions of boards and commissioners for clarification, or is there a way for us to get additional information if we need it?
So at this time, it's testimony only, receiving information only, no chance to ask questions. If you're asking about how much time they have, that's something that we should discuss.
Yeah.
Right now, it's 3 minutes.
So can I follow up to that? Do they know that they have this opportunity? Has there been a message to them?
Yes, the city clerk sent out a email to all the chairs to inform them of this opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
And do we know is there some interest? Do we have an expectation that there will be some? And have they indicated what sort of presentation they're going to have, how long it may be? Or
I have not formally heard from anyone. I know the Board of Adjustment is wanting to present.
But are they only given 3 minutes?
That's what we're talking about.
Okay. The boards and commissions, 3 minutes.
Yeah. Should we give them more?
Should we give them more?
should we inquire whether and how many there are and how much they think they have to say and make adjustments based on that?
Have they taken votes on what they're going to be talking about, or is this the opinion of the person who happens to show up?
Right. Is it a representative of the board or the individual?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, any board or commission member has to disclose that when they speak. I mean, and most boards and commissioners are not allowed to speak on behalf of the commission unless their commission has voted for them to represent them.
Right.
So I don't know why we want to give them more than 3 minutes.
So let's clarify. At 9 a.m., we want to hear from the board members speaking on behalf of the commission on items that they've voted on the commission.
Yes.
And then after that, they could stick around as a citizen and comment and have the 3 minutes. So what I'm looking for after we finish discussion is a motion about A, B, and C, C being boards and commissions. We should give them dash number of minutes.
I think we have 10 minutes to each of the working groups. That seems about right to go through 10 minutes to each board or commission that shows up.
Other discussion, or I'll entertain a motion at any time.
Chair, real quick. I'm seeing flyers and emails about be afraid, city's coming after your housing. And so I'm wondering if city staff, are you guys going to plan to be here and have kind of information and city staff on hand? I guess question for you, Brent. Like, are folks just going to show up and walk in here where there's not staff to be able to tell them?
Hang on, Mr. Lloyd. Commissioner Anderson, let's finish the public hearing process. Yeah. Any other questions, or is there a motion?
I'll move to give boards and commissions a maximum of 10 minutes each to present.
Okay, that's item C. Can you also cover A and B?
In my motion?
Yes,
okay,
please.
I'll add to that motion that we allow 3 minutes to each speaker in the meetings following the public hearing if they have not spoken at the public hearing. And
And then B is just.
Keep going. 1 minute for the ones that did speak.
Right.
Okay. 1 minute for the ones that did speak, and 3 minutes for the second day, if it's needed, of the public hearing, which would be Sunday, October 27th.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Shea. Are there questions to the motion maker? Commissioner Shaw.
Question, do we already have procedures for donated time outside
We do not.
of this? We don't.
Right now, there's no donated time.
Okay.
Questions?
I actually wanted to address that. Should I address it in a separate motion?
You can withdraw it and add it to your motion.
Okay. Well, I'd like to also add that we allow donated time in the public hearing. It doesn't really make a difference whether you hear 3 minutes from 5 people or 3 minutes from 5 people or 15 minutes from one. It's the same amount of time. And as I mentioned before, it's not easy to get people to a meeting to donate time. So I don't think it's going to increase the time that we're here.
Okay.
I'm good with that. For discussion, I'm good with that as a second to continue. So.
Okay, so let me ask, are you saying donate unlimited? What is our typical, Andrew?
10 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes max?
Correct.
All right.
And so they would have to have 3 others donate time.
2.
Well, 2 would get to 9, okay?
Would you say 9?
Yeah,
And
so
3
you could
would
say 9 minutes.
and 3 would get to 10. I mean, it's fine. 10 is fine.
Chair, didn't we already vote on this?
No.
I mean, I thought we talked about this a few weeks ago.
We talked about it. We didn't vote.
Yeah.
Because I'd strongly disagree. I find a tremendous amount more value in hearing from 3 different people than one person speaking for them.
So you can. So we have a motion and a second. You can ask to split the vote, so that we can take that part separately.
Sure. I'd move that we split the vote on donating time.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a second on that?
I will second that.
Is there any questions to that motion?
That's fine.
Commissioner Shaw.
Just make sure you have to be present for your
Yes.
time to be donated.
Right. Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions on this?
First motion.
So
No,
we have-
on this motion.
Oh,
to split.
Okay.
well, just speak to the split.
Sure.
I mean, the reality is that this does inflate the amount of time because the people who are donating are people who are typically not going to speak for an amount of time. We thought tonight's discussion was going to take 20 minutes. It took 90. I mean, this has real implications for digging into the amount of time that we have to deliberate this stuff.
Any other?
You also save the time of people actually walking up, switching places, getting their thoughts together. I mean, having one person speak is actually oftentimes more efficient, and I don't think it's an accurate assumption to say that people who donate their time wouldn't talk for 3 minutes. I think it's easier for a person to carry coherent thoughts if they have up to 9 minutes to speak rather than 3. And again, it's the same amount of time if the people show up.
And some people are also.
Are you speaking? Were you speaking against the split?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
We could
Can I
just
make a point
let's
of
vote
order?
on the split.
Or just that after we split, if somebody wants to amend the proposal for donating time, they can.
Yes.
We're just considering it separately is what we're considering
That's
right
correct.
So,
Yeah.
so let's do it.
Okay, so any other speaking for or against? Okay, all those in favor of splitting, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so now we're back to splitting it, back to the main motion without the donating time, A, B, and C. A motion by Yanis Pulido, second by Shay. Any questions on that motion? Anyone wanting to speak for or against? Commissioner Shaw.
Just real quick, I'll speak for it. It's a one day. We're on a very quick path here. It's a one time they get to come out and talk, and they're used to donating time and used to it being a certain way. I think it's the norm. We should just.
So we're not doing the donating time yet?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
What we're voting on is what's on the paper with the change that the 2 goes to a 3.
And boards and
we
commissions
added
gets 10
C.
minutes.
And boards and commission gets up to 10 minutes.
If it's their official position that they voted on.
Correct,
Right.
for an official board position.
Yeah.
Other questions for or against? All those in favor?
Wait,
Go ahead.
Can I just clarify? It's not that the Board or Commission has voted on a position, it's that they have voted to allow that person to speak on behalf of the commission. I just want to clarify that.
Okay, that's a technicality, but okay,
Yeah.
let's go.
Chair Commissioner Liaison Andrew, I believe they would have to have voted on.
I don't
a
think they're allowed to do
recommendation.
that.
Yeah, that person can only speak as a
If they're legally allowed to do that,
represented
yes,
body
so.
anyway. So it's inherent in any way. Okay.
Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, that motion passes. Okay, the next motion, Yanis Pulido, did you want to repeat that?
Sure, just that we would allow people to donate time. Sounds like we want a 10-minute limit, so we could do up to 3 donations of time, but it would be a total of 10 minutes.
Just a clarification, is the donated time just for Saturday / if it goes into Sunday, or is it also for the subsequent meetings?
Good point.
Donated time. So then that would mean those people would get the 2 minutes or the 1 minute.
The 3 now, because you.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, and if they've already spoken, then their time is also chopped, right? Because if they get 1 minute, they can only donate a minute next time. That would be the rule that's created.
I guess I'm suggesting that I would support donating on Saturday and Sunday. I'm not sure I'm going to support donating times because that is going to, Saturday and Sunday, we can just be there till we can't stand anymore and fall down. But, the other days, it really is going to dig into our ability to discuss the amendments.
I'm confused as how it digs into time. If each person were to sign up for 3 minutes to speak anyway, it's the same amount of time. I'm confused as to why there's this perception that having donated time increases the amount of testimony time. It doesn't. It just means one person speaking instead of 3.
Okay, well, don't respond to that because we just need to respond when it's your turn to go for or against. Go ahead.
I'd like to make an amendment.
Okay.
Substitute that we allow 1 donation of time on Saturday and Sunday and no donation of times for subsequent days that are after the designated public hearing date.
Okay.
So six total, 6 minutes.
6 minutes total on Saturday and Sunday.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Howard. Are there questions about the motion? Okay. Speak to your motion.
I guess it's all one's perception, but my perception is that donating time ends up with longer testimony. It's my perception based on my experience at boards and commissions, and I also I feel somewhat strongly that October 26th is designated as the public hearing date, and if we use the same rules that are generous with donation of time
for subsequent hearings. I mean, we're already giving them the same amount of time to talk. That why then are we designating October 26th as the public hearing date? Then they're just all the public hearing date.
Speaking against? Or neutral?
I am speaking against this motion. I would support the idea of not having donated time on, past the public hearing, because I guess I just don't want to. I want to encourage people to take advantage of the public hearing. If one person can't make it, then yes, let's give them the opportunity to be heard at some other time. At that point, I don't understand why they need to be having donated time if we're just hearing from them. But I would not support this motion that is limiting the amount of time people have to 6 minutes on the day that it is public hearing, because I think we should be able to hear as much from the public in the manner that they would like to give it to us on the on the day that is the public hearing date.
Can that be a
Speaking for?
I have a clarifying question. Are we going to be posted for both days or just the 26th? Because that might, and it might change when people come. Now, it says that after 1 o'clock, you have to be signed in before 1 o'clock. But do we have to notify that we could be meeting on the 27th, and would that be confusing?
Chair, at this time, we will only be posting for the 26th.
Okay.
It's just like any other planning commission meeting. We're not posted for going into tomorrow, but if we run out of juice, we're going to go to tomorrow. Oh. Okay, speaking against, or that was against, speaking for.
Chair, the speaker committee, I'll pull my amendment. Open the floor for other substitute amendments.
Okay.
I'll substitute that we allow the full 10 minutes. What?
9 or 10?
10 minutes of donated time.
2 1/3 people. 3
people.
At the public hearing, but at further meetings where we're discussing the agenda item, we only allow a minute and no donated
No
time.
donations.
Right.
Okay.
We already talked about the limits. No donation.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Kenny. Any clarifying questions?
Chair, Commissioner Hazel and Andrew there. We could do 9 minutes. I don't think a person can get to 10 minutes.
It was going to let one person take a hit of 2 minutes, is basically it. So if 3 people showed up, there's only 10 minutes.
I'll do 12 minutes.
Man.
Is there a second? Are you lost your second.
Can you do 9 or 10?
9.
9.
Okay.
3.
Okay, I'll do 9.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Thompson, second by Kenny. Clarifying questions? Andrew, you don't get clarifying questions. Any, you want to speak for? Or are we speaking enough?
Chair, can I ask Andrew what he's thinking? What are your thoughts?
Oh, he already said what his thoughts were. 9 minutes.
9 minutes.
Speaking for? And speaking against? Or neutral? Go ahead.
So I'm torn here because, last time I think we had 2 public hearings. And again, it's just the accelerated pace of this thing and people's schedules. But I guess we're giving them just 1 minute. But I know we have a lot of work to do, and we're going to be up late anyway. So it's kind of balancing that, giving people another opportunity to speak versus being here till 1 or 2 in the morning. So anyway,
Sure, just to clarify, everybody gets 3 minutes on Saturday,
Yep.
donated up to 9, 3 minutes on Sunday, donated up to 9. Subsequent hearings, 3 minutes, but without donation.
Okay, I heard 1, so it's 3.
No, 1 is if they've already spoken.
1 is if they're coming to speak for a second
Okay.
time.
Thank you. It's worth.
Okay, speaking for, speaking against or neutral. Let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Chair, Commissioner Liaison Everett, could you just repeat it one more time, please?
Okay, Commissioner Thompson.
So at the public hearing, you can have 3 minutes. Everybody, well, sorry, we're not talking about how long they get to speak. That's already been decided. At the public hearing, you can take donations up to 9 minutes of total time for a speaker. But at further meetings where we discuss this as the Land Development Code as an agenda item, there are no donations.
Okay. Motion by Thompson, second by Kenny. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so that motion carries. All right. What else am I missing?
Chair, Commissioner Liaison Andrew, if we can think about, if we can for a minute, pass the code. November 26th, we do have a scheduled Planning Commission meeting. That is also the week of Thanksgiving.
Who, by show of hands, who is going to be here on that day? Okay, we don't have quorum.
I could be, I just don't know yet.
A Tuesday of Thanksgiving week.
Don't be overexcited about raising your hand.
We're trying to be honest.
Try to be here. Yes.
Are we going to have turkey?
Who is in town? And that's one question. Who's planning on being at the commission? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have quorum.
They're committed.
Okay. All right.
And I just think we're going to have I imagine we have quite a backlog that's going to be building up by that point. So it's either that meeting or we're just going to get slaughtered the next couple of meetings.
And Chair, I have one quick question for staff.
Okay.
Mr. Lloyd or Mr. Dutton, are we going to have staff out here being able to help answer folks' questions? There'll be folks that just show up and they were told to be mad or they were told to be happy and they're
Do you
just
mean
showing up.
at the public hearing?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I will be candid. Staff has been enjoying lots of
Microphone.
meetings, working insane hours, and we heard earlier that this was going to be testimony only. So our plan was to provide definitely some staff. I think myself and Anik Baudet will be here for most, if not all of the day, but we were not planning to ask more technical staff to attend. If commission expects to have questions or wants to have a fuller complement of staff present, we will
I think what Commissioner Anderson meant was, are you going to have a tent outside with some flyers and information like you did at the last public hearing that we did?
No, we're not planning. We've been attending a lot of office hours, doing a lot of open houses. We're planning not to. We're planning to give staff the day off.
Okay. I can't argue that. That's you guys have been working so hard. Thank
So
you.
I have one suggestion. Do you have any poster material that speaks to kind of the ways they can engage and
we can information that we could
just
have
to
at a
have
table.
out there.
Sure, that's
Okay.
I think reasonable. We'll do that.
Can I also suggest blown up maps? I know that was heavily trafficked last year where you guys had some blown up maps.
We'll look at that. Yeah.
Not new stuff, just whatever you have.
Okay.
Future agenda items. All right. So this meeting is adjourned at 11 p.m.
lovers do. You don't watch me when I